to day number 2 of the Board of Psychology meeting. A couple of preliminary notes. We will be taking a break around 11:45 for anyone that has concerns about checking out of the hotel. Is checkout time 12? Okay. And we'll be taking a short lunch break, kind of a working lunch break. Those things being said, we've already taken roll today before closed session. So I have a special honor. We're going to return to agenda item number 6C. And my special honor is to introduce to you the new director of the Department of Consumer Affairs, Dean Grafilo, and his deputy director for Board and Bureau Services, Christopher Castillo. And please give them a round of applause to welcome them.
Thank you, President Phillips. Vice President Jones, Executive Officer Sorek, thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to address the California Board of Psychology. I've been director just shy of 8 months, and apologize it's taken me that much time to obviously address the board for the first time. As you folks very well know, just given the breadth and depth of DCA and its 39 entities and the timing of the various board meetings for all, I've yet to figure out how to be at multiple places simultaneously. If and when I do, you'll be the first to know. Really briefly about myself. Prior to coming to the department, I've spent most of my time in the legislature as staff, and I did also work with the California Medical Association in their government relations office. Had the opportunity, most recently, I was chief of staff for current Assembly member Rob Bonta. He represents the East Bay cities of Oakland, San Leandro, and Alameda. And then previous to him, I was chief of staff for previous Assembly member Warren Furutani. He's out of the South Los Angeles, North Long Beach, Gardena. And then previous to that, I was senior staff for former Majority Leader Alberto Tirico. It's a long way for me to say that I think my time in the legislature hopefully will be able to assist this board as well the other entities specific to just navigating the legislature. I'm proud to say that during my time there, I think I've been able to build the rapport and trust of staff and quite frankly members. And as you folks very well know, what happens in the legislature has a direct impact on our ability to ensure strong consumer protections for obviously all Californians. And so during these past 8 months, as I alluded to, I've been truly trying to get a good sense of all the unique issues specific to our 39 entities. I assure you it's going to take me much more than just 8 months to do that, but I wanted to make sure that I was able to obviously be here in person, introduce myself briefly, and share a brief update specific to DCA. And also I want to share with you that my approach in terms of being director is always going to be one where I'm going to take a collaborative approach towards trying to solve the very vexing issues specific to this board as well as others. I completely recognize that you all are the line experts specific to this industry. In no way, shape, or form do I have a monopoly on good ideas. I'm always going to want to approach vexing issues where I'm going to seek the insight of all of you. Doing that, taking the time to be deliberative, getting a good sense of the issues before I make a decision, hopefully will give me the conviction in my decision for the issues specific to this board and others. I welcome more opportunities to work directly or indirectly with this board, and hopefully, as the months continue to go by, those opportunities will present itself. So let me jump right into my prepared remarks as well. First, I would like to report some staffing changes specific to the department. Ms. Christine Lawley, who previously served as the Deputy Director for Board and Bureau Relations, she's joined the Medical Board of California as its Deputy Director. Naturally, we are sad to see her go, but I know that she'll continue to do great things with the medical board, and naturally, we wish her the best in her new position. Additionally, the department has welcomed a new Chief Deputy Director, Chris Schultz, a new Deputy Director of Administration, Natalie Daniels, and a new Deputy Director of Board and Bureau Services, the gentleman to my right, Chris Castillo. Before coming to DCA, Chief Deputy Director Mr. Chris Schultz was the Deputy Commissioner of Community Programs and Policy Initiatives at the California Department of Insurance since 2011. Natalie Daniels has been a fiscal supervisor at the Judicial Council of California since 2015, and she will be overseeing the department's Office of Human Resources, Business Services Office, and Fiscal Operations. Chris, to my right, is actually here, obviously, and he'll provide more of an update. I wanted to give him the opportunity to introduce himself in a moment. I'm delighted to welcome our newest team members, naturally, and I'm confident that these staff additions will strengthen our ability to pursue the department's mission and the services we provide to our various boards and bureaus. Hope you can join me in providing them a warm welcome when the opportunity presents itself. Specific to the most recent directors meeting. This past September, the department held the second directors quarterly meeting with board executive officers. These quarterly meetings are an opportunity to ensure that the department continues an open dialogue with all its boards and bureaus. To that end, we will still be holding an annual meeting with all board presidents to ensure that I'm available to all of you and I can hear feedback from the board leadership on important issues that are as pressing for the department and its various entities. With that, again, I want to thank you all for continued partnership and the work that you do to protect California consumers. I'll now hand it over to Mr. Castillo. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. Well, as you are aware, we have some new faces in the DCA Executive Office, and as one of those new faces, I want to take the opportunity to introduce myself. My name is Christopher Castillo, and I was appointed the Deputy Director for Board and Bureau Relations on October 9th, 2017. I come to DCA with a background in public policy and campaign management, having most recently worked as a legislative advocate where I covered a wide range of policy areas, including labor, higher education, youth mental health, foster care, healthcare, and local government. I have also worked on candidate and initiative campaigns in both California and Oregon. While new to the DCA family, I'm looking forward to applying my experience and skill set to create an Office of Board and Bureau Services that implements the goals laid out in our strategic plan, exemplifies organizational effectiveness, and provides relevant, timely, and accurate information to all of our stakeholders. I also want to report that the department has reallocated available resources to increase staffing specifically for the Office of Board and Bureau Services. These new resources will expand on the services that we are able to provide, including assistance on and across all licensing and enforcement issues, facilitating intergovernment communication, providing board member and executive officer, administrative and technical support, and executing the department's strategic plan. With that, I'm excited to announce that Karen Nelson and Patrick Lee will be joining the Office of Board and Bureau Services as our assistant deputies. Ms. Nelson has been a Chief Operations Officer at the American Leadership Forum Mountain Valley chapter since 2014, and Mr. Lee has been Assistant Chief of External Affairs at Covered California since 2015, and they started just 2 weeks ago. With our new staff structure, I believe we will be able to further the mission, vision, and values we have set forth as a department, and most importantly, serve the needs of California consumers. Please stay tuned for additional updates as we onboard the team and hit the ground running. A couple of other quick updates from the department. DCA Leadership Training. The department officially launched its new Future Leadership Development Program in May 2017 and held the kickoff meeting with program participants and mentors in August 2017. The last meeting of the Future Leadership Development participants was this past October and featured Senator Jerry Hill. Expanding on the department's current Leadership Academy training, the department is looking to help develop the best and brightest amongst the department and its boards and bureaus into its future leaders. The program includes executive mentoring, customized leadership training, and project management project management. And I'd like to just take a quick moment to thank Board Member Horn for her participation in the program. I was actually able to be present for that particular one, and we had a number of inspiring stories and board members, and it was an absolute pleasure being able to listen to you. So thank you so much for participating in that. Pro rata. The department has established a pro rata work group of DCA and board executives to discuss potential improvements and how DCA communicates with boards on this issue. As you know, pro rata is the process by which the department distributes cost amongst its boards and bureaus to cover the departmental services that we provide: information technology, legal, publication services, legislation and regulation review, etc. The work group held its first meeting in August 2017 and the second meeting this past October. And the department also hosted a pro rata open house this past week to provide information on pro rata and give an opportunity for board and bureau leadership to meet the various department divisions. Obviously, a very important issue for us moving forward, and we will be working with this board and all other boards and bureaus across DCA to be transparent and communicate on this issue. A couple other quick items. Required board member training. Just want to remind everybody that 2017 is a mandatory sexual harassment prevention training year for the Department of Consumer Affairs. This means all employees and board members are required to complete this training in 2017, even if it was completed last year. The training's online, interactive, and can be completed at your convenience. Also had the opportunity to run and participate in my first board member orientation training this past week. Just as a reminder for individuals, that is a required training for within 1 year of appointment and reappointment to the board, and the Office of Board and Bureau Services will be reaching out to each board with the upcoming BMOT dates for 2018. Just want to make sure you all know the department is committed to serving its boards and bureaus. Much of the consumer protection value provided from the department comes from boards such as the Board of Psychology, and we always protect consumers better when we are working strongly together. So thank you again. As always, if the department can be of service to the board, if my office can be of service to the board, please do not hesitate to reach out to myself or any of the assistant deputies now working at the Office of Board and Bureau Services. With that, just want to thank you for your diligent work and your valued partnership, and for the opportunity to come and meet you all today. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming. It's a unique experience, and we're happy to meet leadership.
Fantastic.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So I'd like to thank y'all also for coming and talking to us, but I wanted to ask you, Director, what do you see as the most pressing issues for the department right now?
I think some of the most pressing issues are specific to just strengthening the collaborative approach towards, again, addressing the issues specific to each board and program. Just given the breadth of DCA, it's often, I think, difficult to determine, again, what's the best approach to strengthen consumer protections, because given the uniqueness of all the 39 entities, as there are obviously, 39 different boards made up of, many different individuals, and oftentimes there could be 39 different approaches to consumer protection. So being able to identify, for lack of better terms, maybe best practices across the boards can be difficult. But nonetheless, in my view, as I was alluding to previously, I think every board would agree that they don't have a monopoly on good ideas as well. But through, hopefully, again, a collaborative approach towards identifying best practices, towards strengthening our relationships with the legislature and administration, then hopefully the end result will in fact be strengthened and best consumer protections. In the 8 months that I have been on board, the interactions with, again, the legislature, the administration, etc., it's just hard to kind of always being in constant communication and having an understanding, because as you folks very well know, just things just move so very quickly. And as I was mentioning earlier, it's difficult to be in multiple places simultaneously, and that's why I'm so glad that we're able to have, more staff and resources specific to board and bureau services, so that we can, in fact, as a team, be in multiple places simultaneously. I think too, it's difficult for us to get a sense of, maybe what's happening literally on the front lines, specific to all the 39, industries, day in, day out. Again, things move so very quickly, and because obviously California government is a huge entity, it's hard for us to be nimble in that regard. And that's why I'm so very reliant, the team's so very reliant in deferring to the expertise of our entities. So hopefully that we can, in fact, be a little bit more nimble. Thank you for the question.
Is there any other board comment or questions? Hearing none, is there any public comment? Thank you very much for joining us. Okay. Oh, we didn't do that yesterday? Okay. We're aware that there was some confusion yesterday as to the location of the meeting for some people, so I did want to mention, is there any public comment as it relates to items that are not on the agenda? Hearing none. We will then move back to the agenda, and the next item on the agenda, if I'm correct, is the enforcement report. Ms. Monterrubio was unable to join us, but in her stead, she has sent the ever-able Curtis Gardner. Mr. Gardner?
Good morning, thank you. Today I'll be providing you with the enforcement report. It's attachment 13. Please find the attached overview of the enforcement activity, which details statistics for complaints, investigation, and discipline for the current fiscal year. As a reference, all the performance measures have been attached for your review. For each case review, the Board of Psychology tracks the processing timeline. The actual processing time is tracked against a recommended timeline in accordance with a performance measures report. The performance measures establish metrics for processing timelines and illustrates the specific phases of a case review from start to finish. For cases that result in disciplinary action against a licensee, the board refers to Performance Measure 4, which details the 4 distinct phases as follows. PM4A, which is intake only, this represents the time between when the board receives the complaint and when the complaint is assigned to an enforcement analyst. This will end once it has been assigned to an enforcement analyst. PM4B, which is the investigation only, and this represents the time when the enforcement analyst begins their initial desk review, and then they refer it out for investigation by a sworn officer. When the enforcement analyst receives the case back from the field, this phase will then end. PM4C, which is pre-AG transmittal. This represents the length of time that starts when the enforcement analyst receives the case back from the field investigator, and then they refer the case back to the Office of the Attorney General for discipline. This phase will end when the enforcement analyst transmits the case to the AG. PM4D is the post-AG transmittal, and this represents the length of time that starts when the case is accepted by the AG's office. This phase includes the time it takes the AG to draft the accusation, set the matter for hearing, and the number of days that pass in waiting for the hearing as well. And finally, to settle the matter either through a hearing or through a stipulated settlement, which is negotiated between the board respondent and the Attorney General's office. So the performance measures are as the attachments, if you want to review those. I'm going to move on to staffing in the enforcement unit. The board is currently looking to hire a 24-month limited term associate governmental program analyst to the unit and they also want to backfill the special investigator position, which was previously occupied by Barbara Tanner. Ms. Tanner accepted an employment position outside of state service. The associate governmental program analyst will be responsible for desk investigations, assigning experts to case review, material, processing accusations and stipulated settlements through the Office of the Attorney General. And the special investigator will be responsible for investigating the most complex cases, collecting arrest and conviction documents, interviewing witnesses, testifying at hearings. The enforcement program manager will be working with human resources to fill both of these positions within the next 4 to 6 weeks. The expert reviewer program on November 3rd of this month, or this year, the board held its expert training in Los Angeles. Presenters included the Office of the Attorney General, Division of Investigations, board staff. They also had board experts presenting at the training as well. Overall, the training was well received by the experts that were in attendance. They received very positive feedback from current and new experts. And the next expert training will take place in Northern California sometime this coming spring.
How many people attended that board expert training, do you know?
Approximately 25.
Okay.
And it was composed both of new and existing experts.
Okay, thanks.
Moving on.
Really quickly, before we move on, I just want to draw attention to, under the expert reviewer program, it has the criteria to become an expert reviewer, and the second bullet there about the 40 hours must be in direct patient care, that will be discussed at the enforcement committee. So I just wanted to point that out, that will be discussed, how to amend that at the committee meeting level and then bring to the board.
Just going to go over some statistics. The complaint program since July 1st, 2017, the board has received 326 complaints and 11 criminal conviction reports. All complaints received are opened and assigned within 9 days of receipt, and all cases are reviewed by an enforcement analyst to determine the appropriate action. Again, attached, you can review the enforcement flowchart detailing the enforcement processes. The citation program since July 1st of this year, the board has issued 18 enforcement citations. The discipline program, the board has referred 18 cases to the Office of the Attorney General for formal discipline. In the probation program, there is currently 52 individuals on probation. Of the 52 probationers, 2 are currently out of compliance. At this time, I'd like to ask if there's any questions.
I have a question. It's actually back when you're talking near the beginning. Hold on. When you're talking about the stages in investigation, and you have this example here as of July 2017. So it's page 21 of 203 in our combined program. So in the PM4B, investigation only,
Okay.
and it says, on average, it took 523 days for a case to be investigated in the field by a sworn investigator. And that, of a total of 600 and some odd days the case is taking. So is it taking almost 2 years to investigate? It's taking almost 2 years to investigate a case. And I'm wondering why it takes that long. It's just a question.
I believe it was with the previous department we used to investigate the cases.
Okay.
Previously we used HQU. HQ.
Previous, it was a health quality investigative unit did all of our cases.
Yeah.
And the last 2 fiscal years, we've been moving to Division of Investigation to do the lion's share of our investigations. Our turnaround times have improved. However, I know that there's some stumbling blocks sometimes with getting documents and records, patient files, getting the sign off from the complainants. There are some hiccups along the way that can extend the timeline. Mr. Tomplay, did you have anything to add to that? I mean, I know with vertical enforcement, we still work with the AG's office and health quality investigative unit on sexual misconduct cases, so that's still a VE model. Any kind of additional insight you might be able to provide?
Or 2 or longer. I'll give you a few examples maybe, but yeah, Ms. Sorks pointed out in the more complicated cases that are vertically enforced where an attorney is helping out with the investigation, there's usually a lot more witness interviews. So more than just the complainant, there might be multiple complainants. So that takes some time. I think the number one delay is where we need to enforce subpoenas where a licensee is refused to provide records. And that takes just a long time to get into Superior Court and to have a judge rule and say, you really need to provide these documents, and then to serve all of that on the licensee. So resistant licensees can, some of those cases I think can take 2 or 3 years. Other examples, a lot of it just might be caseload with the investigative agency. But it seems like the new agency has a much shorter timeline than previous, so that's good news. That's all I can think of offhand.
Well, I think that's important. I don't know if there's any way we can show it or should show it or whatever, but I mean, for it to be something like, you know, and it does take a long time if you're going to issue a subpoena and you have to give somebody so much time to turn in things and so much time to reply and all like that. And if it's, to me, that makes a difference rather than the caseload is too much and people just aren't getting to it. I mean, sometimes when I look at the date of these, when these enforcements started, and we'll get a case to review, and it's like you know, it was years ago when it first started, and I'm not even sure what I'm saying, you know, except to have some way to let people know, I guess, is kind of where I always go, that it's not a dead process. We're working on it, you know, and I don't know if that makes sense to you, but.
I just wanted, if I may, jump in, and I believe Ms. Monterrubio spoke about the process at our last board meeting, correct? That it's
Right.
much more of a due diligence, and it's like a whole team of people. I mean, does anyone recall that she spoke about that?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we definitely know that there's other agencies, right, that we have to work with collectively,
Right.
which is it's just part of the process, I think.
Well,
Which is fine, but I guess part of what I'm saying is when, you know, if you've got like 2 years or more, and most of it is in this one place, and we don't know why, it looks like, well, what's going on in investigations? When really maybe what's going on is we're doing everything, but, you know, there is due process, and you have to wait, and you may have to wait to get a hearing date or this. I mean, there are things you have to wait for, follow up on subpoenas or something like that, you know, so I don't know.
Oh, Jackie, so you're asking if somehow we are able to articulate that in some kind of category to say this is taking long because some of these things are happening? I know Ms. Monterrubio says it consistently each time at each board meeting. But what I'm hearing, if we were to put that somewhere where people can always see that or know that.
Well,
that
maybe it
help.
would be enough for it just to be in the report rather than it takes
And just
523
leave
days
it
for an
like that. I see
investigation,
what
but
you're saying.
kind of the primary reason. You know,
Okay.
one of the primary reasons
Okay.
is.
And I believe that was the purpose of Performance Measure 4
It
was
was,
to break
yeah.
down
Uh-huh.
the entire process, so going through investigation, the time it takes at the AG, how
Right.
long the enforcement analyst does their desk investigation. So that's kind of the purpose, or it is the purpose of Performance Measure 4 was to kind of break down that process and show step by step.
So maybe, I guess I might be asking to break the
Those down.
Even
one
further.
down.
It's,
I don't know.
I'd like to interject. A lot of this is very case specific. So
Right.
to start to break these statistics out, sometimes it's because it takes longer to do the
Right.
investigation. Sometimes it's because people aren't cooperating and giving us documents. Sometimes it's because people aren't signing off on the consent to give us documents. So I don't know that we can.
Well, that's fine. Then
Then
that, I mean, I'm not saying to do more case by case, but just like you just said, the primary reason, I mean, it could be any number of reasons or different reasons, but one of the primary reasons is like when we are moving through just the whole due process thing, all the time it takes to follow up and all like that. So we might say all these things. These things contribute to a delay in the investigation. That would be fine for me.
yeah.
I
I think one of the things that you're highlighting, Dr. Horn, is that we as a board are very conscious of how long these delays are taking. I know enforcement staff is incredibly conscious of how long these cases are sometimes taking. And we'd like to do everything we can to expedite it. But there are a lot of, and not just institutional problems, there's just a lot of things that are case unique that are
Right.
problematic in terms of doing this. And we do need to make sure people have a full chance to vent their complaint and also that people have a full chance to defend themselves. So it does take time. It's kind of the nature of the legal system in general, I'm sure. You would agree, Mr. Tomplay?
I do.
But let's get back to, Jackie, your question is just to somehow, somewhere, articulate that, those kinds of reasons in very plain, ordinary language.
These are the kinds
some
of things
primary
that might-
reasons that could have the delay happening.
could add to the length of time. I mean, that's really all I'm saying.
And that makes sense. We could, yeah, okay. Thank you.
I'm just going to throw this out there, but initially, or what we've historically done is just include the performance measures in, and performance measure 4 is the one area that I would say the lion's share of programs never meet the target date of 540 days. That target date was presented to the legislature. This is what the legislature asked the boards to report on each quarter. No one's meeting that target, but should we move the target? Should we not move the target? I think it's still, a positive goal to have in mind. But for this meeting, we wanted to break it down to, well, what parts at each stage, how long are each of those taking? So for A through C, or D, those identify the amount of days for each point in the process. So you can see, on average, how do we get to that total number of 1,306 days is what it takes. So what I've written down here is just to add some challenges as to why PM4B is taking a little extra time. I know one or two cases can completely throw off your average and increase it, but we will do that and provide that the next meeting.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
think
I
that's
think
a
it's a
good-
great. I think it's a great point.
Yeah, it is. Thank you all.
One thing that Ms. Sorek and I started to discuss last time I met with her, which was in anticipation of this meeting, was also looking at what kind of barriers might be created in particular types of cases, such as child custody cases, in terms of getting documents, and how we could address that, maybe even at the legislative level, with the help of the department. So I think that people are thinking actively about it, and I know that the enforcement committee under Ms. Akwebedu is very actively interested in addressing this problem. But Some of it may be, as you well know, some of it is outside of our control.
And that's, totally fine. It's really about being transparent and just kind of, but also letting people know, because I think people sometimes it's like, well, why is this
And when they
taking
see,
so long, particularly if they have a personal interest in it.
yeah,
And I think the more we can just say, these are the kinds of things, because.
and when you see such a huge number there, and you see everything else around it moving, and and you go, wait,
Mhm.
yeah, then that makes sense. Thank you all. Thank you, Doctor. Thanks.
Thank you. I just have a quick question on the complaint program. Since July 1st, the board's received 326 complaints
Say again. Oh, where?
on the number complaint. Why do you have
Okay.
to ask me such a
Alright.
difficult question on this thing?
No.
I'm joking.
It's page 23 of
Thank you.
203 in the combined.
Full disclosure, she's on a MacBook. We're on tablets. So
Okay.
I'm just kidding. I don't know what page.
I'm sorry. Say again. Okay.
But it depends on whether you're looking at combined or you look at the original.
Right.
Oh, there. Well, see, on my anyway, this says 4 of 12 on what I'm looking at. The page
I'm
is
gonna go
12.
down.
Anyway,
Up.
okay.
Well, you just push 20.
Okay, thank you. So just we received 326 complaints, and it might be buried a little bit down in the next charts down below, but have we seen a bump? I'm just curious, since February's board meeting to July, in terms of comparatively from last year?
We have been seeing a bump in the amount of complaints that have been received
You
to
know
the
what I mean?
board.
Thank you. Did you find it? Okay, so I was just asking if we've seen a bump in complaints from February's board meeting to now. So, compared to last year. Thank you.
And last year was a particularly heavy year. I think it was the highest. There was over 1,000 complaints. So the volume of complaints seems to be increasingly going up. I'm not sure that we've yet identified why that is necessarily, although we've done a lot more outreach and a lot more messages on emails and things to make people aware of the complaint process.
Mr. Gardner, do you know offhand, we have 50-some people on probation?
Yes.
I'm curious, how many people go off each year and how many come on each year? The turnover of that pool of probationers,
Since
if you happen to know?
since I've been in this position since January of this year, I have had 3 individuals successfully complete.
Okay.
So it's not a rapid turnaround, but it just depends on when they were ordered and it becomes effective. So I'd say a handful, about 5 maybe each year,
Yeah, good.
give or take. But there's also individuals that are told, that will come out of a told status and resume their probation timeline as well.
Thanks, that's good.
I think when I started with the program 4 years ago that we had 35 active probationers, and now we have 52 active probationers.
Correct.
So
That's interesting.
Are there any further comments from the board? Any public comment on the enforcement report? Seeing none, thank you very much for pitch hitting, or what is it? Yeah, pitch hitting.
Yeah. I would like to thank you, Mr.
How
Gardner.
quick
for
my
doing
memory
such-
fades after the Dodgers lose the World Series. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gardner.
Thank you.
Let me, Dr. Phillips, thank you very much for pitching in. You're right, pitching in for Ms. Monterrubio.
Thank you very much.
Well
Thank you.
Okay, so now we are onto the Enforcement Committee report, item number 14 on your agenda. So you don't really get to go anywhere, Mr. Gardner.
The Enforcement Committee met with the board staff in October. We reviewed the disciplinary guidelines. Unfortunately, we were unable to pull through the disciplinary guidelines to get to the other items on the agenda. But we are scheduling another committee meeting this coming December to complete the disciplinary guidelines. Other than that, I don't really have too much to report on it, unless you have any questions for me.
Is there any public comment on that report? Okay. You are excused. Okay, agenda item number 15 is the licensing committee, or the licensing report, excuse me. And that is Ms. Chung.
Hello, good morning, board members. Included in your materials on item 15 is our processing time frame reported as of October 31st. So in case you're wondering, I just want to bring your attention why there is a slight increase in our processing time frames. So we have been experiencing an influx of applications. Also, during that time, we have a loss of staff due to retirement. So in case you're wondering, that those are the reasons why we have a lengthier processing time than usual. And also on the memo, you see our updated licensee number by our license type. Included in your materials also on the attachment A is the licensing population report. We have updated this report to include the numbers for status 85, which was deceased. This statistics was requested by the board last meeting, so we have included on our chart. And moving on to attachment B is our number for each application type received throughout the past 12 months. And on attachment C is our statistics on examination. We have provided a hand carry item, which is in your hand carry folder, our most updated statistics, which was released on our website on November 13th.
People are still looking for it. If you give us one moment.
No problem.
Everybody found it?
Yes.
Please proceed.
Perfect. So yes.
As the members of the public can see, we're still transitioning to our tablets and try to integrate hand carries with tablets.
You can share. Go ahead.
Okay.
You can share.
Perfect.
I think the Keystone Cops are done now, so we can continue, Ms. Chung.
Great. Actually, I just want to bring your attention to these attachments and open for any questions if you may have any for us.
Are there any questions or comments from board members?
I have one question. These numbers are always very useful and interesting. Any theories or ideas on why the October pass rate for first-timers is the lowest in the last 12 months?
Sure. We do have a theory because thinking of the 72-month time limitation for a registered psychological assistant, the regulation was effective 7 years ago, and then this October is their deadline. So we are thinking or speculating that maybe a lot of registered psych assistants, they were trying to get licensed, and to attempt to take the exam for the first time. Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense, given the request for extension of psych assistantships that we receive. Oftentimes, there are people that tell us that they have not been able to pass the licensing exam. So they may have done a desperate Hail Mary and tried to take the exam again, and perhaps not. And now I'm doing football. Oh, my God. What has happened to me today? I don't know. Okay. Is there any public comment on the licensing report? So next in line is the continuing education education and renewals report from Ms. McCochran.
Hello. Good morning. So for my report, I just wanted to give a quick update before I gave the statistics. So I'm currently working on a backlog of 25 citations, and the last completed CE audit was for the month of April 2016. A plan is currently in place to resolve the CE citations and audit backlog and resume monthly CE audits by January 2018. Staff has also been working with the Breeze team to create the capability for licensees to load documents into Breeze. And this uploading function is anticipated to launch on March 2018. And additionally, at the September board meeting, board requested historical information regarding the MCEP audits. And there was a lot of information and reports that I had to, or that we had to pull. So we were just needing a little bit more time to get all the information to prepare for you guys, or for the board. So that will be included in the February board meeting packet or report. So if we go to attachment A, it's the psychologist and psychological assistant renewal applications processed. So on average, there has been 773 psychologist renewal applications processed in the past 10 months. And an average of 605 renew as active and 101 renew as inactive. Additionally, an average of 67 psychological assistant applications were processed each month. On attachment B, between the dates of August 26, 2017 and October 26, 2017, a total of 7 citations were issued. 4 of the 7 were issued due to insufficient total hours, and the remaining 3 were due to insufficient live hours. And attachment C is online versus mailed in renewals. On average, 361 psychologists renew online per month, and an average of 346 renew by mail. And then attachments D through G are the same numbers from the September board meeting, but if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Do we make a distinction between the live hours and the total hours? Can you repeat that? I'm sorry. I'm looking. Do we make a distinction, or do we have a definition for live hours and total hours?
So live hours is the 25% that they have to do in person. So that's about 9 hours that they need to complete in person. And it could be done via webinar as long as it's done in real time. So there's where the student and the instructor can interact. Yeah. You're welcome.
Since we do have an educational function as well as a variety of other functions, it should be pointed out that for people that have had a second audit, there's a surprisingly high percentage of people that fail that audit. Mm-hmm. Once you've failed an audit, you are automatically going to be audited, if I understand correctly, in each subsequent reporting period. Mm-hmm. So it's surprising that people wouldn't, that there wouldn't be more of a learning curve in that process, because I think it was something close to 30% of people, 29%?
32%.
Oh, 32%. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Of people that weren't. So for anyone that's listening in, or anyone that has joined us today, it is very important that you be very careful about your continuing education hours. Mm-hmm. Because particularly if you've already failed an audit.
Yeah. Oh, they automatically. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, they're automatically audited for each subsequent reporting period, if I understand correctly.
Yes.
For
indefinitely,
Oh,
once
Just-
they failed an audit.
It's just the next.
Oh, it's the
audit.
next one?
Mhm. And then if they fail that one, then they would get. But if they pass, then it would
They'd just
be
go back in the
random.
hopper.
Yeah, they go
Yeah.
back in the.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
Yeah. And the number one reason for the fails for the second audits is they've already used those hours for the previous renewal cycle. So it's just record keeping, I guess.
So they've used those hours to remedy the
Mhm.
deficiency in the prior audit, and then they try to count them again.
Correct.
Oh. Interesting. Are there any other questions or comments about the continuing education and renewal report? Public comment?
Thanks. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Winkelman. I'm Director of Professional Affairs at the California Psychological Association. I wanted to ask about the subsequent audits, if people are being informed. Now, it would be best if they would just take the new CEs and be fully in compliance, but I'm wondering if once they are audited, if it's clearly conveyed that you will be audited the next time and you cannot count something, even if it's taken during the 2-year period that was used to remedy the previous audit, so that they would know how to properly comply for the next reporting, for their next renewal period, and know how to complete those and what would count, and that they'll be audited again.
Yeah, so when they meet the order of abatement, which is giving me the certificates for the hours that they missed, when I send them the closure letter, I specifically state that these hours were used to remedy this renewal cycle, and I actually list the courses, so that way they know exactly what courses were used in their previous to remedy that audit.
But does it specifically then say, and cannot be used again?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that. I guess then people are well on notice, and
Yeah.
thanks.
it might be something, just as a request, if this is appropriate, just some information to give out through the listserv or something about, just as a reminder. Thanks.
Thanks.
Any other public comment? Thank you very much.
Nice graphics, by the way. We appreciate them.
The licensing committee report. Item number 17, Ms. Horn, or Dr. Horn.
Okay, let me get there. All righty, so first thing I want to let y'all know is in terms of the pathways to licensure, we're still working on that, and Ms. Chung, you can chime in if I forget anything. We're still working on that. We've been through everything now once. We've held the stakeholder meetings, the 2 stakeholder meetings, as y'all know, and have taken feedback from the stakeholder meetings and incorporated that or included that feedback in our last licensing committee meeting as we looked at the pathways to licensure. And we still have more things to do as we, what we want to do too is after we get everything together, including all the input from the stakeholders meetings, is to go through everything again, just to make sure that nothing is left out or contradictory or that we might have missed anything or anything like that. We plan to do that at our next licensing committee meeting. And then we'll see when it actually comes to the board, right? So, okay. So that's our plan. That's where we are there.
And I would just like to add to that under the leadership of Dr. Horn, with the assistance of staff and Ms. Sorek and Ms. Chung, this has been a very painstaking and laborious process. As a member of the committee, I think I can say it's painstaking. But it has been, I think, incredibly productive and has really made us kind of get down into the granular level and figure out how this is really going to work. So I think the board will be pleased when they finally see the package, but we're trying to get it absolutely right before we bring it to them.
That's right. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so the next thing then are...
Can we take a brief break?
Yep.
Why don't we take a 5-minute break? Thank you. Okay, and we'll now continue on with the licensing committee report.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Okay, for the next part of the licensing committee report, we have some requests for psych assistant, different kinds of things, but I think extending things, I think, generally. So psych assistant number 1, and that's 17B. This psych assistant is requesting an extension to the 72-month registration period to be a psychological assistant. So, and during this person's psychological assistantship, the psych assistant had, I don't know if it was an accident or what, but had severe medical problems and has been diagnosed with a permanent disability, which for a long time made that person, psych assistant number 1, unable to work, and was also involved in legal activities as a result of the disability. So I'm not sure all the details of it, but this person has been disabled for a period of time. We got a medical report about that as well. And this person has accrued actually 3,000 pre-doc hours and is now requesting an extension of the psych assistantship to be able to complete the postdoc hours, which will be 1,500, and requesting the 2-year extension, which is the length of time we get for each 1,500 hours required. So the licensing committee is recommending that we grant that extension and asking the board to go along with that recommendation and grant that extension. Should we take it person by person? Maybe we should. Okay, so for psych assistant number 1.
Did you want to see if there's discussion on that?
I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Is there any board discussion on that? Psych assistant number 1? And is there any public discussion on psych assistant number 1? That request? All right, well, seeing none.
I just want to comment, though, that, I understand I appreciate the situation, and I think that just, out of just gone through my pre-doc and post-doc recently, that this is a very reasonable request.
Right.
And unfortunate. It's unfortunate that it has come to this for this individual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this person isn't asking for any more than we normally allow for a 1,500 hours, so.
I'll make the motion if there's nothing else to be said. Are you ready for the motion?
All right.
All right. I move that we grant the extension of the 1,500 hours for this person's postdoctoral SPE.
I second.
Okay, I'm sorry?
Board discussion. Now that there's been a motion, you have to open it for board.
Okay, is there any more board discussion on this motion then? Because it's been moved and seconded that we grant this 30-month extension, is it? 2-year extension? 2-year extension. If there's no more board comments, seeing none, is there any public comment on this motion? Seeing none. Mr. Glassbeagle, thanks. I'm a little slow today.
Yes.
Bernal,
Aye.
Kazuga,
Aye.
Erickson,
Aye.
Horn,
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Passes.
Okay, thank you. All right, next is Psych Assistant number 2. Psych Assistant number 2 is requesting a 3-year extension to the 72-month registration period. And Psych Assistant number 2 is requesting this because Psych Assistant number 2 has failed the national licensing exam once, is now 72 and has plans to retire in 3 years. And so wants to continue working as a psych assistant, again, not being licensed, until this person retires in 3 years. And the licensing committee decided not to extend this person's registration. This person had not taken the licensing exam again, had basically not done any of the kinds of things that we would have wanted to look for to perhaps extend this psych assistant registration. So the licensing committee is denying this, and we're recommending denial, and we're asking the board to go along with our recommendation.
And I'll just comment, just to add a little bit to the picture, which I'm sure you had an opportunity to read. She first became a psych assistant in 1998, so she's had the benefit of the psych assistant registration laws for 19 years. The reason we put a time limitation on this as being a psychological assistant is not a terminal licensing category. It's not an end point in your career. It's a transition point on to becoming licensed. So I think these were the types of cases that were designed to have the 6-year limitation, given all this being considered.
We realized that we had inadvertently created kind of this underground way of functioning as if one were licensed, but not. So it's a training period, and that's what that limitation ultimately was for, to say this is a transition period, just like Dr. Phillips said. That's what this is for. It's for you to get supervised, do the things you need, the other things you need to do to get licensed, and then get licensed. That's what the period is for. So that's our recommendation. Is there any? Well, I'd like to move that the board accept our recommendation. I'm just going to put it up, and then we can talk about the motion. So I'm moving that.
Second.
Okay. So it has been moved and seconded that we accept the licensing committee's recommendation. Let me ask, is there any board discussion about this?
One question.
Mhm.
Is she's working under, sorry, she's working under, and with someone else, yes? She's working under the licensure of other.
She or
this is
he, I
training.
don't know whether this is a woman or a man, but yeah, this psych assistant
this
is
person.
working under a primary supervisor.
Yes, thank you.
Mhm.
Do you have any information on what population this person is working with?
No.
No.
We don't. The only information we have is what you have, and it basically says this person wants to work for 3 more years and then retire.
And there's also no guarantee that they're going to retire. And maybe if they pursue licensure, they might end up working beyond, 75. And it's to this person's benefit to take the test and go through that.
So if we agreed to it, it's only a 3-year extension. But you're right. I mean, that could happen. So.
Well, it already ended, though, right, in October?
Well, that was the 72 months that we gave everybody. And everybody's who was a psych assistant at that time, and we gave them 72 months to do the things you needed to do to get licensed. And then the psych assistantship would end. I mean, we have a maximum now on a psych assistantship, which is 72 months.
So it has now ended.
So now it has ended. This person was a psych assistant at the time, has continued to be a psych assistant for all these years.
Yeah.
As far as I know, did not do any of the other things that this person would have needed to do in those 72 months to become licensed. So that was our recommendation. Okay.
And the person making this request could take the exam, and if they pass it, they could be licensed as a psychologist, of course.
Right. Any more board discussion about this? Any public comment about this? So, Mr. Glassspiegel.
Let me just be clear on what you're voting on. Oh, I'm sorry. Would you please restate the motion?
To deny the extension of the 3-year extension
Okay.
to the psych assistantship.
Okay, so a yes vote would mean yes, you agree to deny it. And a no vote would mean no, you do not want to deny it. I
That's
just want
right.
to be clear. Thank you.
Yes.
All right.
Ready? Aquibadu,
No.
Bernal,
Can you circle back with me in a minute? Or do we go by order? I just want to think it through a little bit. Is that okay? Sorry, go ahead.
Kasuga,
Yes to deny.
Erickson,
Yes to deny.
Horn,
Yes.
Phillips,
Yes.
Bernal,
I'll say no.
motion passes.
Okay. Thank you. And next is psych assistant number 3, who's requesting a 7-month extension to the 30 months limitation to accrue post-doc supervised professional experience. And this person, actually at this point, this person is requesting an extension to April 2018, so however long that is now, to be able to finish the hours. What happened is that this person had been enrolled in an internship. It was supposed to give her him, all hours toward licensure. That didn't happen, and so this person was looking for other positions to be able to get the supervised experience that he or she needed in order to get licensed. And this person had been through a number of personal problems as well, or issues as well, where this person moved from one jurisdiction, one state to another state, or one state to, I think, was in New York and then moved to California. And again, the internship this person was promised didn't work out, and so it had some difficulty finding an experience that would work out. So now this person has that experience, but again is coming up to the end of the 30-month limit for postdoc hours, and so is requesting essentially a few months extension to get those hours. And the licensing committee supports that, or okayed that, or approved that, and are recommending that approval to the board.
I think the other factor was that she had went through a traumatic divorce in the context of this period of time, so it was sounds like a confluence of circumstances.
Right.
Can I move into motion that we accept her approval for her 8-month extension?
Yeah.
So.
Second.
So is there any, it's been moved and seconded, so is there any more board discussion about psych assistant number 3? All righty, any public discussion about psych assistant number 3? All righty, seeing none, Mr. Glass-Steagall.
Quavidu,
Yes.
Bernal,
Aye.
Kasuga,
Aye.
Erickson,
Aye.
Horn,
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, so if we move on to 17D, is this something you're going to talk about, Ms. Chung?
Included in your materials, this item is for the draft proposal regulatory language for a retired status. The purpose of this language is to enact our Sunset Bill SB 1193, which provided us the authority to issue a license, a retired status to a license. So this regulatory language gives us a specific to carry out this provision. We do have a hand carry item for this with the revised language. So the board can discuss and review and give us any comments or feedback. So you also find the updated language as well as the forms.
Yeah, retired license.
Yeah, sure.
I think we're okay. So basically,
Can you hang on for a second? Because I was going to...
Sure. Are we talking about more than retired psychologists? Yeah. That's it, right? Yeah. Okay. But I want to ask, are we talking about all this, the 1382 as well, and 1387.69, all of that is part of this, or I thought we were just talking about the retired psychologist
Just
part?
retired is
Yeah, okay. So basically, this gives us, it creates this a category of retired status, and these are for folks who have had long careers, want to retire, don't want to keep having to renew and to be inactive, but just to go ahead and retire. They're in good standing. They don't have any disciplinary action against them. They haven't caused any harm to anyone. It's a license that's been in good standing the person's whole career. And this allows people that option to retire. And if they decide they want to come back and be active within we give them a limited amount of time where they could come back and be active or reinstate their license, I want to say, if they decide retirement's not for them. But if they go beyond this period of time, and I think it's 3 years, if I'm reading it right, if they go beyond that period of time, then they have to reapply because they've gone beyond the time. But it allows them to be retired and not perform duties either as a psychologist.
I have a question. Is it 1 3 year, like once in their professional lifetime, or?
So they would be able to go into retired status no more than 2 times. So let's say you went into retired status, decided you wanted to go back into the workforce, you could go back into retired status 1 more time. If they're retired for more than 3 years and they want to come back, they would have to reapply with the board, and that's how we treat a canceled license now. You would have to reapply, take an exam, be reprinted and everything.
I see. Thank you.
After the second time, they have to come back into it. They can't come to us. And just to tack on to that if a licensee has requested to place his or her license in a retired status twice, in order to come back into active practice, they would have to reapply, even if it's within that 3-year period, if it's the second time round.
Okay. Thank you.
So they're allowed essentially 1 coming back. And,
Okay.
yeah. Okay, so that's it. Is there any board discussion about this retired status, creating this category?
What's the rationale behind the 3 years?
Good question.
If I may, the 3 years time frame is established in statute. So we're just clarifying that, restating that it's 3 years and then what they need to do after 3 years if they want to come back active. Mm-hmm.
Question. There already is a statute that applies to this, and we're implementing our regulations. Is that a way to understand this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any more board discussion about this?
I think it'll be wonderful for people that come to the end of their career and they're able to see that they can go in retired status, still be listed as a former licensee,
Right.
as opposed to having either their license cancel or expire. Or this really gives more dignity to people that are in the process of retiring.
And they get to keep their identity too as a psychologist, which is important for folks. So,
Say that again. Excuse me.
get to keep their identity as a psychologist.
But also, I think it continues to add to the body of knowledge about the profession.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a perspective, I think, that's unique and much needed now. So I think it's great.
Yeah, I think it's a really good thing. I'm glad it's happening. And yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. So, what's the next thing to do? Do we have to move this, or is this accepting the committee's report, or is this moving it? What do we have to do?
So we will need the board to, if they approve the language as presented, adopt the proposed language as written and proceed with the rulemaking file.
Approve it for noticing and set it for hearing.
Okay. Does that have to be moved or, okay.
I'll be happy to move that we adopt the proposed language for 1381.10, retired license.
Second. It's all three.
All three?
Oh, really? I just asked about that. I mean, I see all three.
It's because of.
Because this is
Provision about application.
the application fee and everything, yeah. So
I'll
there is a
restate
fee
that,
for that, yeah.
I'll restate that I'm moving that we adopt the language that's been offered for proposed regulations for a retired license.
Just a point of clarification, at this point, the board is approving sections 1381.10, 1392, and 1397.69, approving that for noticing and setting it for hearing.
Could that be incorporated into my motion, please?
Mhm.
It's generally it's not adopted until after the public comment period is completed, so.
Second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded to accept the language in these three regulations here about retired license, the fees for that, and then audit, continuing professional development audit fees. Is there any more board discussion about that, about this category? Any public discussion about the retired category? Dr. Winkelman?
Hi, yes, I think this is, Hi, thank you. I think this is wonderful, too, to have an retired status for psychologists, because we do get questions sometimes from people who are retiring and definitely feel strongly identified with their profession. So thank you for implementing this new status. My question is, I was just wondering if you could clarify the difference between, because obviously we've had retired psychologists before the official status, that what is the difference between this and a canceled or expired license?
So this status is, the retired status is for those current licensee who hold a good license in good standing, that they don't have any pending litigation or any complaints against them. A canceled license is somebody who cannot practice at all, cannot use the term psychologist because they don't hold the status anymore. But for this, for licensees who hold the retired status, they can still call themselves a retired psychologist. So I think these are the main differences between the statuses, just on the terms. Thank you.
But just to clarify that neither category could practice.
Correct.
And the canceled is after 3 years of not being renewed in the system, then they would go into canceled status automatically.
Mm-hmm. When is this going to be effective by? This?
When does that go?
That would depend upon your.
It would depend upon when it got through the regulatory process. We used to kind of say it takes about a year for a regulation, but now that there's an initial review phase, that tacks on an additional 6 months. So it could be another 1.5 to 2 years for this to become operative.
So it has to go, after we okay it, assuming we do, then it has to go through a number of other stages and reviews before it can be enacted, so, or become part of our rules.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Mr. Glass-Steagall.
Quabadu.
Yes.
Bernal.
Aye.
Kasuga.
Aye.
Erickson.
Aye.
Horn.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Motion passes.
And now I would ask the board to make a second motion to delegate to the executive officer the authority to make any non-substantive changes in order, and to work with legal to make any non-substantive changes in order to initiate the rulemaking process.
Somebody needs to make the motion. The president doesn't make motions.
Oh, that's right.
I'll also move.
I second that.
Okay. Mr. Glass? Oh, is there any discussion about that part? From the public either? Okay. Sorry, y'all. Mr. Glass-Steagall?
Quavadu,
Aye.
Bernal,
Aye.
Kasuga,
Aye.
Erickson,
Aye.
Horn,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
passes.
And that concludes our licensing committee report.
Nice.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Horn. It goes from 17 to 19. Okay, we're moving to agenda item number 19. And that is the legislative update. The chairman of, or chairperson of the Policy and Advocacy Committee, Ms. Jones, is not able to be with us today. So it was delegated to me to at least titularly make the report. But I know that Dr. Erickson's here, and he is a member of the committee, and I'm sure he'll chime in as need be. So if this will be largely delegated to Mr. Glass-Steagall. Mr. Glass-Steagall, would you like to talk to item number 19A?
Absolutely. Good morning, board members.
Good morning.
Agenda item 19A is board-sponsored legislation, which is AB 89, the Board Suicide Assessment Intervention Coursework Training Requirement Bill. This bill will require the licensees effective January 1, 2020 to have a continuing education requirement met in suicide assessment intervention training. And the bill was signed by the governor on September 1st, 2017. The agenda, or the advisory completed by staff and posted on the website, is included for your review. Before we move on, do you have any questions about AB 89?
So I have a question. I think that if people even before this goes into effect can get the training, they don't have to wait till after the training, after it goes into effect, correct?
Absolutely. The only way for it to count towards the actual renewal requirement, not the training requirement, it can be double counted as a training requirement, as a one-time requirement, and CE. But the only way to count it as part of your CE to be met during that renewal period would be to take it strategically, depending on what renewal cycle you're in. So you take it prior to that renewal after 2020.
Ms. McCochran, you want to chime in here?
Yes. So they can take the course if they wanted to fulfill it by taking a course.
Yeah.
They could take it now, and then after 2020, on their first renewal after January 1st, 2020, they can attest to have completed the requirement. If they wanted to count it towards their CE, they would have to take the course within the renewal period. So if their renewal period is between 2019 to 2021, they can take it into that period. So then that way it'll count towards their renewal.
Right. Okay.
But they could also take it now and count it towards their 36 hours now.
Now, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And then
And it
come
would still count
2020,
as
they
having
would,
had the suicide.
right, then they would have met the
Good,
one-time
great.
requirement in 2020. So
Great.
they can take it now, count it now towards their 36 hours,
Mm-hmm.
or they can take it between 18 and 20
Yeah.
and then also count it towards their 36 hours.
Correct.
Yeah. And I just want to really quick say thank you to Dr. Winkelman in our audience today, because as we were drafting the advisory, I reached out to her and had her review the draft just to make sure that from a programmatic standpoint that we weren't being unclear and advising licensees of the new requirements and how it could be met. So I just want to say thank you, Dr. Winkelman, for your input and your feedback.
Mr. Glassbeagle, you want to move on to the next item?
Absolutely. Agenda item 19B1A is bills that the board has taken positions on throughout the legislative session. And the first bill is AB 244. It's a maternal mental health bill. The board had a supportive amended position on the bill. The bill is a 2-year bill. We've sent the author an email with the requested changes on October 1st, 2017. And once the author begins modifying the bill next year, we will be in touch with them at that point. And no action is required. This is informational. The next bill, if I may move on, is AB 1456. It's a professional licensure exempt settings bill. This allowed all exempt settings with the time frame extension from some were 3, some were 5 years. Now all of them are 5 years for all practice and exempt settings. This bill was signed on July 31st, 2017 and became effective the day it was signed. We have an advisory attached as well for your review and any questions. I will continue on if there's no questions. The next bill is AB 1188. This is the health professionals loan repayment bill. This bill will increase the biennial fee collected at the time of renewal from the licensees of the Psychology Board and the Board of Behavioral Sciences from $10 to $20. The bill will become effective January 1st, but there's a implementation date of July 1st, 2018. The advisory is also attached for any questions. Moving on, the next bill is SB 547. This is the board's omnibus bill. This bill will become effective January 1, 2018, and the bill will remove specification in statute for who can pay the psychological assistant registration fee and change the delinquent fee to 50% of the renewal fee not to exceed $150. Our advisory is also attached if you have any questions. All right, moving on. The next bill is SB 572. This bill would prohibit healing arts boards under the department from issuing a disciplinary action or otherwise penalizing a licensee who commits a violation that does not cause irreparable harm to a consumer and is remedied within 15 days. On May 3rd, staff were notified that the author is no longer pursuing the bill, but because the bill is not dead at this point, we are still monitoring it, and we anticipate it to die at the beginning of the legislative session.
Okay. Why don't we stop there for the moment, Mr. Glassbeagle? Is there any public comment as to the items we've just addressed as it relates to legislation? I love your ringtone. So why don't we take a break? We're going to take a break so people can check out of their hotel rooms to the extent they have not done so and eat lunch. So it's 11:45 now. We're going to reconvene at 12:30. Okay, well, so our break is over and we're back to the legislative update. Do you want to do the watch bills?
You can do it.
Yes. So I think we got to item B2, watch bills.
We did. I apologize while I get back to it.
This is so interesting. That's what it is.
All right. So the following attachment is a list of bills that the board is watching throughout the 2017 legislative session. It's provided as a report, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
You know, so many of these are familiar from having gone through these in past quarterly board meetings. I think we can, unless there is any comment from the board or any public comment, perhaps we can just move on.
Absolutely. Ms. Sork for 19C.
It gets us through a lot. Okay. So that brings us to item number C. Is that going to be you, Ms. Zork?
Yes.
Okay.
So included in your packet under item 19C is a draft omnibus legislative proposal. This proposal is to amend sections 337 and 728 of the Business and Professions Code regarding the brochure addressing sexual contact between a psychotherapist and a patient. This discussion item surfaced from initially a licensing committee meeting where we were going through pathways to licensure and the provision of the brochure between a supervisor and a trainee. That item was moved to the Outreach and Education Committee, which has its own side work of working with experts from the Board of Behavioral Sciences, Medical Board of California, as well as our board, to convene a group of experts to review staff amended new draft of the brochure. And as we were looking at the brochure and the draft, we looked at the authority to produce the brochure, which is a Department of Consumer Affairs brochure. And there were a couple of changes that staff from the three programs came up with in consultation with each of our legal counsels. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you all may have. It is a hand carry item.
Yeah.
Isn't it on our phone?
If you download the hand carry folder, but if not, I have paper.
And the only change between the hand carry and what's provided in the packets was a renumbering of 728 subdivision C4 and 5.
Oh, so it's just renumbering.
Just renumbering, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. There was also one other change, and that was to add a registered psychologist to section 728, a registered psychologist, a trainee under the supervision of a licensed psychologist.
Right.
To the language, just to ensure that the definition of psychotherapist was all inclusive for our program as it is for the Board of Behavioral Sciences.
Previous to this, I think it said psychologist and psychological assistant. It did not say registered psychologist. Yeah.
Questions at this point? Under the sexual behavior definition or clarification, 728, looks like it's C3, means inappropriate communication, including but not limited to texting, emailing, or phone calls of a sexual nature. That sounds good. Was there thought given to sexual behavior that could be in person, where there's no contact with the patient? Gestures, language, would that be included under sexual behavior? Hopefully.
Yeah, I think it should be. It says including but not limited to texting, email, or phone calls.
Do we?
It would cover any inappropriate communication.
Does that include social media as well?
How is social media defined? Different from texting or email?
Like Facebook or?
I mean, just general inappropriate shout-outs?
No, I
To
mean,
your
I
Facebook
don't.
group or?
I'm just saying that, being that social media is what it is, I don't know if we need to specify that or just include that.
If you're trying to get at sort of a one-way communication, if somebody posts on their own Facebook page, is that? I'm not sure I would necessarily define that as a communication, because I think what this generally seems to be getting at are interpersonal communications. I'm not sure that it's sort of a one-way posting would cover it. So if you wanted to, then we would have to maybe think about other ways to word that.
I understand the intent behind including the list of these specific things like texting, emailing, or phone calls, but it kind of almost draws your attention in a specific direction, whereas it's really any inappropriate communication. So I wonder if it really helps us to put including but not limited to.
If it helps us to do what?
Put including but not limited to, and
Yeah.
then just talk about 3 forms of communication.
Right, and none of them are in person or anything, yeah.
One, nobody's in person, and not
Yeah.
necessarily, I guess you can, instant messaging or, whatever.
I mean, sexual behavior is a lot. I don't even know why this wouldn't even be called sexual communication and talk about, it could be talking, texting, any form of communication. Because sexual behavior, gestures could be part of sexual behavior, and without touching. So,
Good question.
Did you hear that? So they're doing sexual communication instead of behavior.
sexual behavior is much broader than sexual communication.
So you want it to stay broader with behavior.
If you stay broader with behavior, it includes communication.
Right, so you want to keep it, you don't want to limit it to sexual communication, you want to broaden it to sexual behavior. That's what
If
you're
we
saying.
broaden it to sexual behavior, then, yeah, that would be communication in person or through other means. It could be gestures, it could be.
If someone were to do something sexual in
Yeah.
front of somebody else, that would be
Yeah.
sexual behavior.
That would be sexual
So
behavior.
you've got to define it in some way.
I also think sexual behavior carries a different connotation than sexual communication.
Well,
So I'm
maybe
just
we want
saying-
two things.
No.
Both of them.
I just think
Why
sexual
not?
behavior gets that to me because it's broad enough to include something that's not wanted, and it's also broad enough to include something that is wanted. So I think sexual behavior, really, I wouldn't change that.
So how do you define it then?
Question.
Means inappropriate.
It could be gestures, it could be verbal communications, it could be.
So it's any kind of conduct. So it
What
means
I'm reading-
inappropriate conduct.
Could be.
What I'm reading here is that it reads means inappropriate communication, which makes it sound like it's limited to
Limited,
that.
yeah.
And don't we?
Right,
We
right.
want to get something a little broader that
Right.
includes gestures
Right.
or.
So
But
we're
it
going
means
to.
inappropriate conduct or communication.
There we go.
Oh, there you go. Did you want?
In person or via technology.
There's so many ways to do bad stuff now in the context of a therapeutic relationship.
Did you want to say sexual behavior means inappropriate conduct or communication, including but not limited to gestures, texting, emailing, or phone calls of a sexual nature?
I don't think giving this example thing is, I don't think giving the examples is helpful. Because every time you're going to give an example, there's going to be a lot of things that you're not including in the list.
So you're suggesting it be sexual behavior means inappropriate conduct or communication of a sexual nature.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you want to include verbal, like including verbal and nonverbal communication? Because that will include gestures.
That's correct.
Although that'd be sexual behavior too. I mean, it'd be conduct, so.
Yeah.
It could be verbal or nonverbal.
Mhm.
But we're not going to specify that.
Do we need to
Yes.
specify it?
I don't think so.
I don't think.
We just wanted to clarify that communication is not just verbal.
Correct.
That's the.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Look at that. I mean, really, it's.
So does this need to go back through all the
I think I think what might help is in drafting the legislative proposal, if we can articulate what you at least mean by inappropriate conduct or communication of a sexual nature. That way in case the question's asked by the Senate BMP committee, we want to be able to articulate what you mean by that. Even though if it's not spelled out in examples in the language, if we could provide some guidance.
I mean, it's an infinite amount of stuff you could do. I mean,
You could send pictures to somebody.
you could rub yourself in
Yes.
some way that was suggestive.
Mm-hmm.
You could
talk about
reveal
the other
parts of
person's
yourself.
body parts.
So body language, gestures,
Verbal and nonverbal
Verbal and
communication. We're back to
nonverbal
verbal and nonverbal
communications.
communication. You think if we list enough things, they'll be.
Can the board staff probably more so think of examples of complaints that you may have gotten that you were not sure were covered by the current definition that you would like to make sure are covered? I think that might help. Explain why you're looking to further define sexual contact.
Mm-hmm.
It strikes me that unfortunately some of the news we've had recently about sexual harassment may inform us as to the types of things that aren't necessarily contact but could be considered harassment, and would they fall under this particular regulation? If a therapist were to harass a patient by leering or in a way that was obvious, it seems like that should be something that is not permitted.
Yeah.
Hugging for a long period, unasked and unwelcome. And that would definitely be, it doesn't have to be touching private parts, as this.
It's just a piece of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a separate section here about sexual contact is inappropriate
Right.
touching of intimate parts, but those are already defined in the law.
Right.
I think what we do need to make sure is in saying sexual behavior, that we're giving adequate guidance to people on some level as to what it is. But it is a bit like obscenity. You know it when you see it, but you don't necessarily to
paraphrase.
To quote some
Yeah.
a much more important jurist.
Right.
Do we leave it vague, or do we give examples? But the examples tend to take people off course, I think.
I think vague is better.
I think having it more broad is fine. We just want to be able to, in the legislative proposal, explain some examples so that the reasoning behind the change is a little more explicit and obvious to the consultants that will be reviewing.
So one of the things, I'm just trying to think of things that I've noticed, and it may be the way the law is stated now, so I'm not sure. But sometimes when cases have come before us and sexual impropriety, say, is not a piece of it, and yet when we read it, it's like, well, there was no, say,
contact.
Yeah, necessarily in terms of like intercourse. But there were all kinds of other things that were happening, but that were sexual and unwanted, and but there wasn't a finding for sexual misconduct.
This isn't the day. I agree with that, Dr. Horn. I think what is important, though, to remember with these sections that we're looking at is really not about defining what is sexual misconduct, for which you can take discipline against a licensee, but what triggers a subsequent treating therapist to provide the the brochure.
Right.
So some of the conversation, I think, is actually aimed at the misconduct that sometimes the board would like to get at for disciplinary purposes. Just
That's a good point. But, for example, if somebody is talking to a client about the way she looks and I mean, I don't know how to go into it anymore, but it's more than you look nice today or I like your haircut or whatever. It's, that would be the kind of thing that is not appropriate. And I think I wish I could articulate it better. I mean, but those are the kinds of things I think we would want people to know. We'd want clinicians to be sensitive to, that if they hear something like that, that it's like, hey, maybe you should, let me tell you this, that's not right. And I think it's more those things that, to my mind, sometimes are more subtle, that people may not know. Is this therapy? Is this part of therapy? Is this what's supposed to happen in therapy?
But I'm sorry, but when you said that, Dr. Warner, does inappropriate communication and conduct that gets at that? But I see what okay. Yeah, I think that kind of gets at it, no? Yeah.
I think if I'm understanding that a male therapist might say to a female patient, you look happy and pretty today, and that would be okay. However, if the male therapist said something about really, really sexy and went on in that particular vein, then we're talking about something that's not appropriate. Am I following? I mean, that's how I'm thinking of this.
So I don't know that we necessarily need to get that settled. So, but just in terms of trying to give you examples, because I think if we say, inappropriate verbal or nonverbal communication, conduct that is, inappropriate conduct, I think we kind of understand it. But if you have to give something to the legislature, I would say suggestive gestures or comments.
Unwelcome. Suggestive or unwelcome.
They may not be unwelcome.
I know they may not be unwelcome.
Although if they're welcome, they're still welcome.
Well, and we say things as therapists that are sometimes unwelcome, but it doesn't mean we're doing anything inappropriate.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So I think is this enough sufficient guidance? I mean, in terms of, is this something that's been jointly drafted with the other two boards?
It is just something that the staff from the three boards have reviewed and looked at and came up with, but it is the board's omnibus proposal, just ours. So if the Senate BMP committee agrees to include this in an omnibus bill, then we would ask the Medical Board and Board of Behavioral Sciences to support the bill once it becomes an actual bill. And what we can do is look at a couple of the cases that we've seen where there has been not sexual contact, but sexual conduct or sexual behavior, and we can include a couple of general examples where this would have been included in what we're talking about with behavior.
Yeah.
And of course, I like the way it's written at this point because you don't have a title of that booklet, and that's been I think we ought to have a different title for that booklet.
I'm a fan of the old title.
Really quickly, it was just pointed out by Ms. Marks that there's a section of the board's Business and Professions Code dealing with sexual contact with patient. And I think if I am hearing it correctly, the overall conversation that we're having today is maybe we need to look at that and look at the language to see if we need to review and amend that section when it comes to our own discipline and broadening what we have as sexual contact, and that's on page 87 of the Laws and Regulations book. So what we can do if the board president and the chair of the enforcement committee so please, we can add this to the list of enforcement committee items to review. And
87.
Page 87, and it's section 2960.1, sexual contact with patient. That's the section.
So you'd want it to say sexual
Behavior
or
instead of just contact.
So then you are getting at.
Mm-hmm. 2960.1.
But then it could refer back to 728.
On page 87.
So if the omnibus were to make the change to 728, which 2960.1 references,
Then it would be
then
incorporated into.
we could move forward accordingly. If the enforcement committee reviews it, brings the language to the board, we could just add it to the list if it's okay with the committee chair.
Ms. Aquagudu, are you amenable to having that added to the enforcement agenda?
Yes.
Okay, so if the board agrees with the change to remove the examples and change it to sexual behavior means inappropriate conduct or communication of a sexual nature, adding in the actual proposal to the staff the examples of what that means with sexual behavior, I would just need a motion from the board to approve the language as written and submit a legislative proposal to the Senate Business Professions and Economic Development Committee for omnibus consideration.
Okay. Just like.
You so move?
Yeah.
I so second.
Is there any board discussion? Is there any discussion from the public? Ms. Winkelman? Or Dr. Winkelman, I should say.
Hi, Dr. Winkelman with the California Psychological Association, Elizabeth Winkelman. I just wanted to point out and ask for the board to consider what would be the potential impacts that would be potentially unanticipated or overly broad in changing this language. I think we all can agree that we want to protect patients from inappropriate sexual contact and sexual conduct. However, I have concerns that right now, this language that you're expanding on, right now, it very clearly is limited only to in a very specific definition of conduct of touching of an intimate part of another person. So clearly we know what that is. It's defined in the penal code. In terms of other types of sexual behavior or communication that might be inappropriate, I think that that's already addressed in some other areas of the law and ethics. And so, for example, in 29, hang on. Oh, right. 29, Business and Professions Code 2960, it talks about unprofessional conduct, unprofessional.
What page are you on?
So, I'm on page 83 to 84. Sorry, 85 to 86. Sorry, I skipped a page. 85 to 86. If you look at the grounds for action under the Business and Professions Code, so that already includes any act under paragraph O on page 86. That already includes any act of sexual abuse or sexual relations with a patient or former patient within 2 years, functions within 2 years. I won't read the rest of it. And then there are also ethical prohibitions in terms of exploitation of patients. And I'm just concerned that by adding communication, that there might be some areas where there are proper communication about sexual issues that are part of the treatment, about a patient's sexual history or trauma or orientation, and that I would just ask that the board would carefully consider what the expansion is of the language, what are the potential repercussions, and is this a problem? I mean, aren't these people already being disciplined who have had inappropriate types of sexual conduct with their patients?
I think I understand what you're saying, Dr. Winkelman, in the sense that these words are relatively vague, so it doesn't give as much guidance as one would hope. Although I have to say, even the existing statute says sexual misconduct. What constitutes sexual misconduct? Again, it's a fairly broad term. A lot of things are interpretable within sexual misconduct.
I guess I feel the real broadening is conduct versus communication. And the way it's written right now, it's about actual physical conduct and inappropriate touching of another person, which is clearly a problem. There's no reason why a psychologist should be inappropriately touching the intimate parts of another person as it's currently defined. However, communications about sexuality might in some cases be appropriate, and then in some cases it would be inappropriate, exploitative, or harassing, but in some cases it's not. And so I think that there's a real clear distinction there between those two things, and that whereas the former is always going to be a problem and unprofessional conduct, the latter, just the verbal communication, or written possibly, but certainly just a verbal would be in some cases, might enter more into a gray area in some cases.
I would agree with you. I mean, and part of it may be how the communication is perceived as opposed to how the communication's intended. So you could be talking to somebody about their sexual functioning, but they might find it in some way that they feel like you're making some kind of sexual overture to them, when in reality you're just talking about their sexual functioning, but because of their psychological or developmental history, they're interpreting it in a different way than it was intended. So it is.
So I wouldn't want that to be an automatic, you've done something unprofessional. I would want that to be something that the board would be able to consider on a case-by-case basis when it's a complaint. And maybe there's some language that needs to be changed. I'm just hesitant I just wanted to bring up my concerns about having overly broad language.
I think I can appreciate that, and maybe that's something the enforcement committee can think about. I think, again, this started by us thinking about what kind of language do we want to use in this, what is now the brochure, Professional Therapy Never Includes Sex, whose title hopefully will change. But and so that's how it's really started. I think we do want people to know that certain kinds of communication, it may not rise to the kind of level that sexual contact might, actual sexual contact, touching intimate parts of someone else, which is clearly a violation and never okay, in a professional relationship. But what kinds of things might a person not be aware of that, or wouldn't be as obvious? So I think that's where it started, and so. But I do think those are important things for the enforcement committee to think about, going forward. I think it's a really good point.
I agree.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm sorry, may I just add one thing too, though? And please correct me if I'm wrong, because this is also going to be part of the brochure, correct? That we're working with
Right.
other, the medical association and other professions, right? So,
Medical board.
the medical board, I'm sorry,
and
medical board.
Behavioral Sciences.
Yes.
And when we have the meeting with the experts from the 3 different programs, part of the brochure talks about sexual behavior. So we may, depending on how that conversation goes, this may come back to you with some different language with input from the experts. So whenever we submit a proposal for omnibus, it's just to kind of get the language out there. Typically, we'll have amendments throughout the process, but it's just to kind of get the ball rolling. So,
and also, thank you very much for your comment. Also, and someone said it's a brochure because we want the language broad because it's the population we're reaching out to. So not in the brochure, we don't need a lot of specificity. However, I like that we've come back and zeroed in on the actual language in the sexual contact with patient, that language that's in the book. I think that really helps as well.
Well,
So-
I actually think maybe it'd be good, Lucille, to have more specificity in the brochure so that it gives more guidance to people that potentially feel like somebody said something inappropriate to them, so maybe that they have some examples of things that would be like a sexual overture or a sexual
But
invitation.
that's when they can that's when they can contact the board and ask for examples or what does this mean or that. Because if we try to get too specific in the brochure, I think we lose the flavor of the brochure. But I think as it is done now with the reference to what's in our codes, laws, and regulations, I think that's a good way to do it. And like Antoinette said, we'll have an opportunity to have that conversation as well. So this is all good information that we can certainly take it to the committee and talk about it. So that's a good thing.
I wanted to make a comment, ask a question. Dr. Winkelman or our staff, it seems to me that the brochure is intended to inform and educate the public, the consumer, and our regulations are intended to regulate the profession and be a basis for discipline as needed. We might want more examples or more broadening somehow in the brochure, but that doesn't mean, does it, that we need to broaden the regulations necessarily. So I'm trying to, in my mind, think of these as 2 separate things that we're doing and wanting to ask the question of, are we missing anything in terms of regulations that we think we need to properly regulate people that do something that's sexual that they shouldn't do?
I guess I go back to Dr. Winkelman's original point, and I do think it's an important one, and that is I don't think we want to define it so vaguely that it's going to have a chilling effect on the effectiveness of therapists in dealing with delicate issues, because we do that. The amount we talk about sex would be remarkable to other people. So I think that it's a very important consideration, and one we will keep in mind when we have the discussion in the Enforcement Committee.
In December.
And it'll eventually come back here, so you'll have an opportunity to take a look at it again.
I'll look at it more carefully. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that.
It's a thought-provoking topic, given the current climate in our country, and
Isn't that amazing?
yeah.
Hi, Dr. Schaefer, Division 2 CPA. I resonate with a lot of what Dr. Winkelman said. I first had a question for the board. Is this promulgated on cases that have come forth to the board that has increased the awareness of the need to move forward with this? I know that in this current climate of the last few months, it would be reasonable that many groups have become heightened in sensitivity around speaking of sexual issues. But I'm just wondering if this is based on cases that came forth that gave light to the need to basically expand what has kind of been working, it seems, and maybe it's not working anymore, but is there some data that this is based on?
Originally, we were just looking at the brochure. That's all. Okay. It's outdated. It doesn't have a great name.
Yeah, the color scheme too could be changed up, and the typeface, I agree, but.
And so that's what we were doing.
Okay.
It's like, let's create a better brochure.
Sure.
And we had, that original brochure was the 3 boards, and so that's how we took it up, or our staff took it up. The staffs of the 3 boards kind of looked, and as they were looking, blah, blah, blah.
Well, as Dr.
But
Phillips.
that
Go ahead.
said, as we look to maybe the regulations or even statute, one of the things then we've talked about is sometimes when cases have come before us because of such a narrow definition, we have seen people maybe who've really been hurt, but the definition has been so narrow of sexual misconduct that sexual misconduct hasn't been found when we're sitting here like this was sexual misconduct, you know. So part of it, I mean, we're mixing our 2 things is my thought. You know, one is the law and the regs what we want them to say, but the other is, does this brochure say what we want it to say? So
I think the issue with sexual communication is the point of my contention. And I agreed with something that Dr. Phillips said of, I think there is a need to be a bit more explicit. I think it's a bit obtuse to state it in the way that you're suggesting, with all due respect to all the work that's gone on. I'm certified in sexual dysfunction therapy. I have been for 25 years from Loyola University in Chicago by Dr. Damina Renshaw. When you do that kind of work, you're very explicit and very graphic in helping couples around particular issues. I also have a lot of work expertise in the area of sexual abuse and working with clients with multiple personality disorder, and sexual abuse histories are extensive, and you discuss that. Now, in training a lot of trainees and talking to colleagues over the years, it's always struck me how often, already in our field, there's a reticence to even touch on certain topics: spirituality, religion, ethnic, cultural backgrounds, and sexuality. And we know that our clients are amalgam of all these and more. So to put something out that, with all the best of intentions, obviously, may, because it's not well defined and it doesn't speak to, around communication, something that would be a caveat, except in the context of the therapy or the work being done that's specific to issues regarding sexual behavior or functioning, then my concern would be the pullback of individuals further in our field, the psychologists, not pursuing necessary information and therapeutic intervention around these issues. I've even had cases of, patients where interns and postdocs had to speak to them. A patient came in with a transparent blouse on and went to group therapy, and there were complaints by male patients. It had to be addressed directly, and I'm giving you an explicit example because it was raised about clothing. The vicissitudes of how this plays out in clinical daily life are innumerable and hard to cover in all its ways. So I would encourage or advocate for what you had suggested. I think it was you, Dr. Phillips, and perhaps Dr. Erickson, to give some context to what's meant by the communication part, because I don't think it's the intention of the board to stifle or to reduce the therapists doing their mandate around the topic, as much as it is not to misstep in a way that's abusive or colored with personal intent to sexually abuse the patient in some way, which is a totally different issue.
I think part of what we're struggling with too is that so much sexual behavior has now gotten reduced to communication, such as, for example, sexting, which would not fall within an intimate contact definition, and yet very clearly would be outside the scope of. So it's trying to strike that balance between being inclusive enough so that we can get at the behavior we find problematic, and at the same time, being respectful of the fact that psychologists do get involved in sexual material. I will add as an aside, I think beyond the effects of laws or regulations, part of the reason that some of our colleagues do not go near sexual materials because they don't feel comfortable with it.
Clearly, and so we don't want to encourage them to be more reticent when it's a real-world issue with our clients. We want to not give excuse not to move into the areas that are necessary in their work.
Well,
and
I
as
will
you
say
know,
that
psychodynamically and psychoanalytically, we have patients that whatever is said could be misconstrued as something sexual in nature and be a complete projection and part of the transference. And by having communication not be well defined, then it lacks help in guiding the therapist. I'm sorry, Dr. You were going to say something.
I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Actually, we're going to go to Ms. Sork. Didn't you want to go?
Really quickly, I just wanted to, I'm hoping this provides a level of comfort, but anytime we get a complaint, it's going to go to an expert for review, and the expert is the licensee that's going to identify whether there's a departure from the standard of care or not. And I would hope and assume that if something was in the normal line of business that was in the therapeutic relationship and identified as something predictable or normal standards, that the expert would opine that there wasn't a departure if there wasn't a departure. So this is not something the legislature is going to define or the staff is going to define, but once a complaint is received, it's going to be the expert that says, this is okay or this is not okay. So I just want to insert that for perspective.
Of course, and my concerns are not at the point or even assuming necessarily that the complaint will be made, more a priori in terms of how the psychologist might respond in reading this and then reacting to it. Certainly down the road, all of what you said would be relevant.
You're speaking to the chilling effect that something like this could have on our effectiveness as psychotherapists.
Yes, I'm not touching it with a 10-foot pole. No pun intended.
So I do want to say that the number one complaint still across the United States, ethics complaints, malpractice complaints, sexual misconduct. So this is still a huge problem, as much education as we've done about it, as much as, all this kind of stuff
I'm with
comes
you
out.
100% and more, and I wish we could legislate in a way that was totally corrective and preventive individuals from misbehaving in inappropriate ways and harming others, especially from someone that comes from a place of treating people that have been sexually abused and sexual harassment cases. The percent and the increase that we see continually in all areas of life and function, it's alarming. So I'm in concert with all of that and want you to understand that my concern is not from that perspective at all. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Dr. Schaefer. Thank you very much. May I just say, it would be nice, just like you said, if we could legislate all of this, but our function is to move forward a brochure, a piece of information that's going to bring people to just what Dr. Sorek, Ms. Sorek said. Truly, the expert we will be having these conversations until we can ferret it out and move it forward in such a way that it's going to heighten everyone's knowledge and awareness of it. But what we want to do is to make sure that we get the information on the brochure to make the public, the profession, the folks in the profession aware that this is of great importance. And that's going to bring them to where we need them to be.
But we're also talking about changing the statute as a result of looking at the brochure.
You're exactly right. But I'm saying all of that will be in that. And so and where I'm going with this is simply, we don't want to make it so definitional, so heavily laden with words and what this means and what that means, because we do not want to step on our own toes and step on our own message, because then people will begin to say, well, what does this in the brochure? So what does this mean? Oh, this means that. That's in contradiction with the law and all of that. So what we want to do is get it out there in a way. That's where I'm going.
I would agree with you, and then I'll go to Dr.
Okay.
Winkelman. I would agree with you. However, we also have a duty to make it clear enough in the statutes and regulations how people are supposed to conduct themselves, that they know where at least have a general idea where the line is.
No, you're right.
yeah.
And that's why when why am I calling you Dr. Sorry today?
She's so wild.
Yes. When you reference back to the law, I think that was wonderful. But yes, so
Okay.
that's where.
Dr. Winkelman?
If I may have another opportunity to comment, I came across some additional information in thinking about this that I think would be relevant for the board to consider, which is what is already included in unethical sexual harassment in our ethics code.
Huh?
And I think they actually do a very good job of explaining of defining sexual harassment. And of course, the ethics code is already incorporated into what's enforceable by the Board of Psychology. So I would like to read to you what this, it's section 3, standard 3.02. It's on page 580. And so this is already unethical, already enforceable. Psychologists do not engage in sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is sexual solicitation, physical advances, or verbal or nonverbal conduct that is sexual in content, sexual in nature, that occurs in connection with the psychologist's activities or roles as psychologist, and that either is unwelcome, offensive, or creates a hostile workplace or educational environment, and the psychologist knows or is told this, or is sufficiently severe or intends to be abusive to a reasonable person in the context.
We still may want to reference that back in this law, because how we deal disciplinarily with specific sexual misconduct is different than how we would deal with a simple breach of the ethics code. And it wouldn't be a simple breach of the ethics code, but a breach of the ethics code. Even our enforcement process is different when we're looking at sexual behavior as opposed to other things. We have vertical enforcement in that particular situation. But I think this is a great starting place for a definition, and it may save us from reinventing the wheel, so to speak.
Okay,
So
thank you.
It's very helpful.
Thank you. That's exactly what Dr. I know why I'm doing, yes. That's what she said how many minutes ago? Thank you. In terms of referencing the law. But go ahead. Thank you. I'm done.
Okay, well, I think we've exhausted that topic for today. It's going to the enforcement unit. We'll have a committee. We'll have an opportunity to talk about it, and then it'll be coming back to the board for further discussion. Okay, but there is still a motion that needs to be made, and what would that motion be, Ms. Sorek?
Yes.
Ms. Dr. Sorek?
So Ms. Akwebedu and Dr. Erickson moved and seconded to adopt the attached amended language and work with the Senate Business Professions and Economic Development Committee to include the section changes in an omnibus bill. And we will bring language to the February meeting, and after that time, we will have had the meeting with the experts from the 3 programs. So if there's any additional insight as to sexual contact and sexual behavior, we can bring that to the February meeting. And there will be time for amendments to the language along the way.
Wouldn't it be appropriate then to potentially withdraw the motion, since we don't have the language that we want to send?
The deadline for submission is the end of December, so we will need to submit language by the end of December for consideration for omnibus. We can always make amendments along the way. The meeting with the experts is December 7th, so unless you wanted to have a special board meeting between December 7th.
I'm sure there's a massive sentiment for that.
I would recommend if you guys are comfortable enough with the language, we can always suggest changes.
Well, I would want, if we're going to do this, I would want whoever we're giving the language to put in the omnibus bill to know that this is still going to need substantial refinement. My concern would be that we're taking them language that they think is final. And then we're substantially changing that language after the fact. So I'd rather get this right before we take it to them personally. So at this moment, my feeling would be to vote against the motion.
If it helps process-wise, submissions to the committee are due by the end of December, but typically the committees don't introduce the bill till April or March at the very earliest, so there would be the opportunity to have the board meeting to discuss the language and then submit changes before it's introduced. So
Almost like a placeholder.
exactly.
Okay, very well.
Because as long as we understand it's a placeholder.
Can we just have a motion to get the ball rolling?
Well, that's what the motion would do.
Yeah, just to get the ball rolling and not necessarily on the language. Or
Well, no, that would have to be with the language.
with the language, but just to get the ball rolling.
Right. With the understanding that we're just getting the ball rolling.
Yes.
Okay. Is there any further discussion regarding the motion on the board side from the public?
Ball rolling motion. That's the one.
Yeah, the get the ball rolling motion, yeah.
Sports
Anything from the public?
And
Okay. Mr. Glass-Steagall?
Aquimadu,
Aye.
Bernal,
Aye.
Kasuga,
Aye.
Erickson,
Aye.
Aye.
Horn,
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay.
19.
19, oh yeah. So we move on now to item number 20. That's legislative items for future meetings. Either board or the public could suggest additional items that we could take up in future agendas regarding legislation. Are there any board additions to the agenda for future meetings as it relates to legislation? Ms. Winkelman, I notice you've taken you're in the batter's box.
Hi, Dr. Elizabeth Winkelman again from CPA. I would like to request that the board would put on its agenda for consideration at its next meeting a bill that CPA plans to introduce, and this bill is going to be the Telemental Health Expansion Bill. So we are hoping to introduce it in early February, which would be shortly before your next meeting. And with the board's permission, I'd like to give a little background and information about what we are planning to introduce.
That's permissible, isn't it, as long as it's not board comment?
I'm sorry.
She can explain. Without us commenting on it as a board, we can't
You can't
comment on the
discuss it,
subject
just-
matter.
You can't discuss it, just to have Dr. Winkelman talk about it to the extent that the board can decide whether or not to put it on a future agenda.
Okay,
Okay.
please feel free.
Thank you. Thank you. So California law currently defines telehealth broadly as a mode of delivering healthcare services and public health via information and communication technologies to facilitate the diagnosis, consultation, treatment, education, care, management, and self-management of a patient's health care. And that's in the Business and Professions Code, Section 2290.5. So currently, California law allows but does not mandate coverage by insurance for telehealth services. More specifically, the law requires insurers to cover telehealth services, quote, subject to the terms and conditions, unquote, of the insurance plan. But this has resulted in inconsistent reimbursement for telehealth services. And in fact, in the winter 2017 Board of Psychology Journal, there was an article called Telehealth Reimbursement for Psychological Services, which summarized the problem as follows. Currently, there's no law that mandates how telehealth services must be reimbursed, and plans can place restrictions and terms on its reimbursement, which causes managed care plan coverage of telehealth services to vary widely from plan to plan. These plans cannot outright preclude reimbursement of telehealth services, but the restrictions, terms, and conditions on reimbursement can render them practically unreimbursable for psychologist purposes. For any significant changes to occur in regard to reimbursement of telehealth services, legislative action would be required. So this is actually directly in line with what a problem that the Board of Psychology has previously been made aware of. And substantial research supports the use of telehealth, particularly with mental health care, including a recent California Health Benefit Review Program report, which found that there's clear and convincing evidence that live video conferencing is equivalent to in-person care in psychiatric health outcomes. Also, many states already require some type of reimbursement for telehealth. So the primary provisions of the proposed bill would be that it would mandate California insurers to cover mental health services provided using synchronous audiovisual telecommunications technologies. Reimbursement would be at parity. It would be at the same rates as for in-person services. Services provided via telehealth under this bill would be subject to the same confidentiality and medical necessity requirements as in-person services, and delivery of such services would need to be clinically appropriate for each individual patient in the professional judgment of the mental health services provider. In addition, the bill would mandate coverage of mental health services provided via telephone in crisis or emergency situations when an in-person or audiovisual telehealth service is not available. It would also clarify that crisis or emergency services provided via telehealth interjurisdictionally by a licensed California mental health professional, when either the patient or the provider is outside California, would be permitted under California law. Of course, we can't say what that would be under the other state's law. So the rationale would be that it would promote access to crucial mental health services in California, especially for patients who have difficulty obtaining in-person care due to factors such as the geographical location of a remote or rural patients, physical or mental health conditions, so for example, disabled or homebound patients who have difficulty with mobility and attending in-person visits, and also for people who have practical strains such as employment or childcare or elder care responsibilities that make it very difficult for them to obtain in-person care. Specifically, the bill would mandate, as I mentioned, insurance coverage for mental health services appropriately provided via audio-visual technology, and would require coverage in crisis or emergency situations for services provided via telephone when clinically necessary, thereby reducing the need for expensive and disruptive emergency room and inpatient care. And as I mentioned, we're planning to the timeline is this, that we're planning to identify a sponsor, enlist supporters, and introduce a bill prior to your next meeting, but just prior, in mid-February of 2018. So my request is that you would consider this, put this on the agenda for consideration at your February meeting, and if there's anything else that would, that I could, any questions or information or anything else that I could provide to you in advance, to please let me know.
I'm anticipating that there's no objection to adding that to the agenda for the next board meeting. I would suggest, Dr. Winkelman, that to the extent you can get us the language as early as possible, because it would actually really need to go to the Policy and Advocacy Committee prior. Oh, the board first? Okay, so we'll come to the board first. So that, but the earlier we can get it, the better.
I have a question, not for Dr. Winkelman, but for you. Can we get, or maybe Noreen, can we get a copy of what she shared? I was going to ask Noreen if we could get a copy of what Dr. Winkelman shared with us.
Her comments?
Her comments.
A copy of her comments?
Yes. Okay.
So if you'd be kind enough to email to Ms. Sorek, or Dr. Sorek as she's come to be known. If you could email to her so she could distribute it out to the board members.
Very well.
Your
I'd
comments
be very glad
would
to
be
do
very
that.
much appreciated.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry. We are now going to go on to item number 22, which is the regulatory update. Oh, no, sorry. I skipped 21. We're going to have an overview presentation regarding the regulatory process from Mr. Glass-Steagall.
Did you want to move to the, because it'll be here?
Yeah.
Break to turn on the projector. So today I'm going to provide the board with an overview of the regulatory process. While it's a general process for everybody that implements regulations, the Department of Consumer Affairs does have a specific a specific way for us to act within the department and how to get the regulatory information through and approved in order for us to notice it with the Office of Administrative Law. So I will cover both ends of that in this presentation. So just a little background, a regulation is a rule adopted by the board which implements, interprets, or makes specific the statute in the board's Practice Act. A statute sets forth general legal requirements or authority, whereas a regulation makes the requirement or authority more specific and enforceable. Regulations are created through the Office of Administrative Law through the rulemaking process rather than the legislature. If anybody has any questions, let me know. So when is the rulemaking process utilized? It's utilized three different ways when the board needs to when the board needs to implement a new regulation due to a bill that became a law, or we need to change an existing regulation due to a bill that became a law, or we want to create a new or change an existing regulation that already has the statutory authority to do so. So there is we call it the informal rulemaking process. This is just the Department of Consumer Affairs review process. So first, the board develops and adopts language, regulatory language. And just like we did today with the retired language, that is now at that first top left blue box. So you guys accepted the language. Now the board staff will have to put together a package with the language and the initial statement of reasons and the notice with the informative digest and a bunch of other documents that really kind of stay behind the scenes, but they're financial documents and notice documents and authority documents showing us where we have the authority and the reference for the regulatory language, and we submit that all to the Department of Consumer Affairs legal team, which is our legal counsel. The legal counsel will review the documentation, send it back, and it'll go back and forth until it is satisfactory, which a few times is not uncommon. After that, the Department of Consumer Affairs legal representative will give it the sign-off, and that will be in the form of an email that goes to the person who submitted it, like myself, and to the Department of Consumer Affairs regulatory analyst, and they're in the Division of Legislation and Regulations in the Office of LRR. Once that happens, I will take all the documentation and submit it to them, where they will then pass the documentation back through the Department of Consumer Affairs legal. It will go through the chief counsel. It will go through the deputy director of the Department of Consumer Affairs, the regulations deputy director, and then it will go to the executive office to be reviewed by the director. Once it makes its way all the way through DCA legal, DCA regulations and legislation, DCA executive office, then it gets sent to the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, which, if anyone isn't familiar, that is the agency which oversees the Department of Consumer Affairs.
Housing.
Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. Once they sign off on the language and all the necessary documents, it goes back to the Department of Consumer Affairs regulations analyst, who then contacts me and says, hey, it's good to go forward.
So Jason, at any point along this chain, someone could say no, and it would get bounced all the way back to us.
Yeah. Yeah. They may want additional information, additional clarification. They may just have concerns. Absolutely.
Which is, I think, important for people to know that are watching our board processes, that this is what, and these are all necessary steps, but this is what creates an enormous amount of time, and sometimes even more substantial time when something gets bounced for a particular reason.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The board at this point has not had a regulatory process complete this informal rulemaking process. It just became an official process maybe within the last 6 months. Yeah, about 6 months. We have now 3 packages that are at the first blue square, and we are working to get them the rest of the way through. We have been told the whole chain can take anywhere from 6 to 9 months. Right? Yeah, about 4 to 6. No, it's around 6+ months. Yeah, to get through.
And our 3 are what, Jason?
Psychological assistant language, the retired regulations, and then telehealth. And the next slide.
So wait, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So you said going back to once staff review, DCA legal reviews it, and if they have any questions, you said it goes back to the DCA regulations coordinator?
The DCA regulations coordinator coordinates the movement of that package through the whole chain.
Oh, I was just gonna ask them once, if it goes back from here to here, does it then go back up again?
Oh, if it does, it would go from the bottom of the green back to the regulations coordinator, who would then contact us and say, hey, we have an issue. Here's the concern that we're hearing, XYZ, and let us know what how we need to address it. And that could entail a whole bunch of different things. Maybe something has to come back to the board. Maybe
Just to clarify, typically if there's an issue, it's an issue in the notice document or the initial statement of reasons. So it's not necessarily in the language, because the language is going to be heard at a board meeting with input from legal counsel. So authority, reference, clarity of the language, those are issues that are taken care of at the board level with consultation with the legal counsel. But typically when we're going through the initial statement of reasons, which explains the why we're looking at the change in the regulation, why do we need the change, is it already covered somewhere else, or is it unclear? Those are typically the back and forth communications that happen is in the supporting documentation, not the actual language.
Any other questions on this page? Go ahead.
So DCA legal counsel, step number 2, is that our?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. She denies this. Yeah. Okay, so further than, yeah. Next slide. So once the department and agency sign off on give us the green light to move forward with the regular rulemaking process, that's when the real process through the APA begins. And that process begins with the board taking the appropriate, staff takes the appropriate documentation over to the Office of Administrative Law. We submit it for notice. It's held for, it's very tiny, I apologize. It's held for public comment for 45 days. And at that point, public can submit written or verbal comments. After the 45-day comment period, the board has the option to hold a hearing, which this board generally, 100% of the time, has a hearing. They can be done inside or outside of board meetings. It's not necessary to have it done, but this board always chooses to have it done at a board meeting, which is the most public setting you could do it, which is great. And just a caveat: if a hearing is not elected, you have to notice that you're in the notice. You have to say you're not having a hearing, and then if one person requests a hearing, you're having a hearing. So it's always easier to have the hearing and make it public and transparent, just to reduce any questions or issues. So at the hearing, the board opens it up for an opportunity for public comment. The public can also not just submit comments ahead of time, they can also appear at the hearing and give additional comments. After the hearing takes place, the board will consider all of the comments that were received during the 45-day public comment period and any that may have taken place at the hearing, and decide if any changes are needed at that point. Let's say, for example, that no changes are needed. Then the board staff will work on the final documents. I'll come back to that. If changes are needed, right, the board says, we like some of the comments, we want to make a change. Then you can see, so that the big red arrow that goes down to the 45, and then that little arrow that comes back up to the 45, right? So that's if you make a super major change and you change the entire direction of the regulation, where you say, we're talking about A, we really want to talk about B, then it's almost a new regulation package and you have to go with a new 45-day comment period. If you're making a minor change that is substantive, but it still has the same topic of the regulation, then you just have to go to a 15-day comment period. And you can have as many 15-day comment periods as you need, with the caveat that the entire process, from the day you notice the initial language with the Office of Administrative Law to the day you submit your final regulatory package back to the Office of Administrative Law, which we haven't gotten to yet, can't be more than 1 year. 1 year.
Otherwise, it has to start over.
Otherwise, you run out of time. Yeah, you have to start over. Sort of. But in this, again, just to be clear, that does not count the time in this prior page. This does not count this whole process. This is outside of the 1 year process, which is very helpful.
So it's just the next page. That is
Just this page. Just this page is 1 year. Yeah.
okay.
Now, with my timeline, we're going to say that we have language that everybody's happy with. We've had enough hearings and everybody's is totally happy. It goes back to the Office of Administrative Law after we take some documents that are like the final statement of reasons and the updated informative digest. It's just to talk about changes that we're making or why we made changes from the initial notice language, and if there are none, it's just a quick update to the documents to say that there really weren't many changes. Then you make a book that's in a binder, and you take the binder to the Office of Administrative Law, you submit it, and you say this is for review and approval, hopefully, and they have 30 working days to review and approve the language. If they approve the language, it becomes effective quarterly, so they have quarterly effective dates where if it's approved on a specific day, there's a cutoff of when it can be effective that next quarter. If not, you wait till the following quarter. Unless you pick a specific day past that point, or you can say it needs to be effective immediately, but you have to show cause to have language effective upon execution, which you'd have to, again, have cause. Before I get back to that, once the 30 working days are done and they do approve the language, they send you back the binder, which we have to keep in perpetuity forever, because if the regulation is ever challenged in court, the only item that the judge will look at is our rulemaking package. So we have all the rulemaking packages for all of our regulations in the office, and we frequently reference them. If the Office of Administrative Law reviews the language and denies the language, which happens very infrequently, the Office of Administrative Law always tries to work with the office, so while they're reviewing it, they may call and say, hey, I noticed something, can you make a quick change if it's non-substantive? Like, hey, you missed a comma, or you missed your table of contents isn't right, or you're lacking a little bit of something that makes no technical actual changes to the language. They will tell us and let us try to fix that for them. Their goal is to work with us, not against us, which is great. But if that's not possible, they can deny the regulatory package completely. If they do that, you have 90 days, right? You have 90 days to resubmit the regulatory package back to the Office of Administrative Law for reconsideration. So even if your regulatory package gets denied, you have an option to have it resubmitted. And then even if you can't hit that time frame, you can request an extension from the Director of the Office of Administrative Law. So you're not all the way out if it's denied, but it does make it a little bit more difficult. So what does the Office of Administrative Law look for? When you submit the final document, the final package to the Office of Administrative Law, they look for the standards for regulations, which is authority, necessity, clarity, consistency, non-duplication, reference, and then they also check to make sure you met the procedural requirements, which is the notice and the hearing and all the good stuff that I just talked about. They will make sure that we do go through and receive agency approval and department approval for our regulations and Department of Finance approval and everything necessary. The authority is to make sure we have authority in statute to have that regulatory language that we're specifying. The necessity, we're justifying why it's necessary, that it's clear language, that it's consistent with our laws, that it's not duplicating other laws, and that it's not in consistency also is that it's not duplicating or not in conflict with like federal laws or other laws in different areas, other regulations. Non-duplication, again, that it doesn't duplicate what's in the statute. If you have a statute that says you got to pay a $20 fee, you can't have a regulation that says you have to pay a $20 fee. That's just duplicating statute. You can't do that. And then if they want to make sure that we're referencing appropriately there's an authority and reference at the bottom. They want to make sure we are referencing the statute that we are making specific appropriately. Any questions on I think it's 7. 1, 2, 3, 4. Standards? No? Great. So, current regulatory packages that the Board of Psychology is working on. We have the Psychological Assistant Regulatory Package, Continuing Professional Development, Telehealth, Pathways to Licensure, the Disciplinary Guidelines, and the Professional Therapy Never Includes Sex brochure, which is that omnibus that we just talked about in the last agenda item number.
So that's a statute, not a regulation.
Well, the brochure itself is incorporated in a regulation that we'd have to do a Section 100 change for the brochure. Yeah, we would have to do a regulatory package because the brochure is incorporated by reference in the board's regulatory language. So once the statutory changes is done, we are the enforcement. That's the whole point of looking at the actual book and making changes to it, and then we would resubmit it. Anybody have questions on the regulatory packages that the board has in motion? Nope. I believe that's it, unless anybody has questions.
Thank you. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glass-Steagall.
You're welcome.
It is an amazingly complicated process.
You surely did that.
I think you can teach a class on that, Lucille.
That's why I got the PowerPoint.
Oh, you did?
Let's send it to the PowerPoint.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's talking about the rulemaking process.
Right.
That's so important.
Just real briefly, with the initial review process, while it does add some time and additional steps, the goal of that change to the initial review process was that there would be less issues on the back end when you're in the formal rulemaking process, so that if the department or Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency or even finance has issues or concerns with the package, we'll hear about it early before it's even a formal rulemaking. So that was the proponent of starting that process.
Yeah, if I can add, because that is such a lengthy process, which is necessary, having that be within the 1-year time frame was problematic because it could leave the board little time to make additional changes necessary. So having that be outside of the 1 year time frame is great because it lets them, the agency and the department, take the time they need to review the documentation and then let the board have enough time to move forward with any changes that are necessary. I absolutely agree.
Great. Okay, we're going to now move on to item number 22, which is the regulatory update, review, and consideration. And I believe that is again Mr. Glassbeagle, but maybe incorrect.
Yes, so on behalf of Mr. Thomas, the language for the standards for practice for telehealth was approved by the board at its meeting in February of 2017. This package has been submitted to the Department of Consumer Affairs Legal Affairs for review. This item is for informational purposes only. No action is required at this time.
Great, thank you.
And then Ms. McCochran is going to go over 22B, continuing professional development.
So, staff recently had a training, a regulations training, where we went over the CPD package, and it was reviewed in preparation to submit to DCA. And during this training, staff modified the language. So you'll see we highlighted where we made the changes, and for items that we were going to take out, we put the reason why and where we'll be inserting them into the ISOR, the initial statement of reasons. So the motion is, or the staff action requested is to review the draft regulatory language and move to accept the language as written with delegated authority to the executive officer to proceed with the rulemaking file.
Would anyone like to make that motion? We can discuss it then.
I'd like to make that motion that we
Seems appropriate.
say that again. What am I moving? That we accept the language and
we accept the language as written with delegated authority to the executive officer to proceed with the rulemaking file.
That's the motion I'd like to make.
Is there more to that? Ms. Mark?
No, I would just add that I assume you want to set it for hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
Do we want to now?
Right. Do you want to, as part of the initial rulemaking file, you want to approve this language for noticing and set it for hearing? Because that's something
and
that,
set it for
that you
hearing.
usually do, but not all boards do.
And set it for hearing.
Okay.
Would anyone like to second the motion?
I'll second it.
Okay. Is there any board discussion?
So I just want to say something about the language that was highlighted and taken out. It's it was determined, I guess, on review that the language that's been highlighted really should be in the initial statement of reasons, not in our regulatory package. It shouldn't be part of the regulations, but it should be part of the reasoning for why we're doing the regulations. So just wanted to highlight that.
Any board discussion of the motion?
Oh, and we changed the dates because we have extended, from where we started it and everything. So just wanted to talk about the changes that were made. That's it.
Hearing no further board discussion, is there any public comment? Mr. Glassbeagle?
Bernal?
Aye.
Kasuga?
Aye.
Erickson?
Aye.
Horn?
Aye.
Phillips?
Aye.
Motion passes.
So we're now on to item 22C. Who's doing 22C?
Probably me. 22C, this regulatory package was submitted to the Department of Consumer Affairs Legal Review on November 6, 2017, and this is the psychological assistant regulatory package which makes the regulations consistent with our sunset bill. Any questions? That is it. That's all of them.
Okay. We're getting there, folks. Okay. Item number 23, the outreach update. Ms. Bernal.
And this will also be very quick, so we will be moving right along. Strategic plan update, agenda item 23A. Nothing, no additional items have been updated since our last meeting. Correct? Any questions?
Really quickly, just to mention that the strategic planning session, the board staff will be working with the solid unit to set up a strategic planning session in December, and I believe dates have been sent out to all of you for consideration. So we're really excited about starting that process again and moving forward in 2019 with a new 5-year strategic plan.
And you're referring to December of 2018?
Yes.
Okay.
Not this year.
Please.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any word on where it would be held?
We've been discussing, places that would be very comfortable for us to facilitate that kind of discussion. It won't be this kind of a setup, but it'll be working tables. We've talked about Mission Inn going back there possibly again, and just looking at what the state rates are and all those good things.
The most hotel, non-hotel we can find.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions? Any public comment? Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 23B, communication plan update. And again, also it's the same as above, no additional items have been added. Questions from the board? Public comment? Thank you. Agenda item 23C, website update. Mr. Glassbeagle, could you walk us through this a little bit?
Absolutely. In the website update, I've included the top 5 web pages viewed between September 1st, 2017 and October 30th, 2017. And then as well, with the same time period, I included the viewings for the following specific pages. So we have the most recent newsletter, which is the summer newsletter. And we also have the newsletter page, so that's all the graphs that continue behind the introductory memo. We have the continuing education page, laws and regulations page, filing a complaint and applicant information page, as well as the disciplinary actions page. New to the information, I provided all of the advisories that the board has put out. And their views since they've been put out. It's under year to date, but they haven't. The only way to do it was to pick January because they came out on different dates. So that's included in your website update. I'd be happy to take any questions. Would you like me to continue to the social media update?
Would you please?
Absolutely. So 23D, the social media update, is the board's Facebook, Twitter, and webcast documentation for your review. The most popular post between the last meeting and this meeting, there were 2 that were right up there. It's the requirement, the AB 89 requirement, that was on 10/23, and then there was a September 18th that talked about the verification of experience and supervision agreement regulatory package, which went into effect on October 1st. And then I added to the social media charts, I added Facebook followers because we weren't tracking that over time, and I figured it wouldn't hurt, so I added that graph.
And I also just wanted to add to Dr. Misorik's list of credentials that continue growing. She's also a PR expert.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Sorik. She is also now, right, the one that oversees our Twitter and tweets and Facebook, and so we need to add that.
Mr. Glassbeagle and I are a good team on our social media presence.
Yes.
Well, thank you both.
You're welcome.
Any questions? Board, public comment?
Do we have an explanation as to why there were a huge increase in views on February 9th for our board meeting webcast?
Absolutely. That is the day the first day of the February board meeting where we had the majority of the public available providing commentary on custody evaluations.
Okay. Makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Agenda item 23E, the newsletter. Ms. Sorek, is there anything you'd like to add or speak on?
Just that included in the meeting packet was the latest published journal, which was the summer journal, and the fall journal will be going out in December. I believe the last day of fall is December 18th, so it should be out before the 18th. And the current newsletter is currently under legal review, and then it'll go to publications for the fall journal to go out.
Thank you. Any questions, public comment? Agenda item 23F, our outreach activities. There are 2 activities that have taken place and one coming up on December 8th. Mr. Thomas Craig will be attending the California Psychology Internship Council. And both Dr. Phillips and Dr. Horn went out to 2 different events. Dr. Horn, would you care to share about your presentation that you participated in?
Future Leadership
Correct.
Development Group?
Yes, please.
Sure. So the Department of Consumer Affairs has a mentorship program for promising leaders, I want to say, in departments. And it's a several-month program. I don't know how many months it is, but it's a several-month program. And I was part of a particular panel of board members from different boards, and we essentially talked about our career paths, how we got to where we were, what brought us to the board, what kind of information we thought it was important to impart to these future leaders. As I looked out into this group, I was very happy to see there were 2 of our Board of Psychology staff members there as part of the group. One of them is Mr. Gardner, sitting back there. The other was Evan, also a future leader, so that was very exciting. I'll also say Ms. Sarek is a mentor for one of the people in that group. Is it just one person in that group? One of the people in that group was one of the people who helped facilitate our stakeholders meetings, Lucy. Y'all remember Lucy, and so she helped facilitate that. She was in that group. So it was actually very exciting to see people, in that group who we knew, who are part of the Board of Psychology and all that, all that. I also will say that the board was complimented by Solid and the people who conducted our last strategic plan, as a matter of fact, and talked about using the board's plan as a model for other boards who do strategic planning and stuff. So that was also really nice to hear. So it was a very good feeling to be part of the Board of Psychology on that day. So. And I want to thank Ms. Sarek for the opportunity for putting my name in to talk on behalf of the board, because it was really nice to be able to do that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And also just to share another additional outreach activity that will be coming up soon is that someone reached out to me from the Augustus Hawkins High School in South LA. They're having a Mental Health Careers Day, and we were able to facilitate with one of our stakeholders, Dr. Schaefer, Division II CPA, and she's agreed to participate and be able to speak to and present a mental health career to small student groups, get the word out to like inner city schools on maybe getting involved or considering going into the field of psychology. That's coming up Friday, December 1st, so we're excited about that. We can't wait to hear a report at our next board meeting on that.
Can we talk about the ASPPB meeting? I want to talk about something that happened there.
Sure.
Would that be all right?
Yes.
Outreach. This isn't an official outreach, but as you know, I go to the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Board membership meetings, ASPPB. That's the association of all the licensing boards, psychology licensing boards in the United States and Canada. And I just attended their annual meeting where they had some, I think, extremely interesting topics. One of the ones I want to bring up that they talked about, so the theme of the meeting was maintaining strong public protection while reducing barriers to licensure. So it was a focus on that balance of how do we have more people come in and serve the populations that we need, but also maintain the standards that you need to maintain, you know. So with that in mind, on the first day, the topic was on health service psychology versus general applied psychology. And the issue was, should general applied psychologists be licensed, and what do different jurisdictions do about that? And let me just say this. The ultimate recommendation was that right now, if we just talk about California, we let people who aren't health service psychologists decide whether or not they want to get licensed. It's not a requirement. And so if they want to get licensed, you know, they go through the steps to get licensed. If they don't want to, there's no way to regulate them. And of course, one of the things that ASPPB has been doing is looking at this issue of, can people who aren't health service psychologists harm the public in their actions? And they've come down with, yes, a lot of what they can do, particularly because non-health service psychologists, particularly if we're thinking about folks who work with organizations or industries, they can create tests for hiring and firing and, you know, like employment decisions and stuff like that. They do program evaluation. They do things like this that have effects on large groups of people. And a recommendation at the ASPPB meetings was that rather than, most jurisdictions don't allow non-health service psychologists to make a decision about whether they want to be licensed. They say, you're either exempt from being licensed, we're not going to go after or you know, monitor you or regulate you, or we have an alternate pathway for you to get licensed, and you need to be licensed if you're working with people or doing these kinds of things that can potentially harm the public. Mm-hmm. And so they were making the recommendation that jurisdictions really think about that, putting them in non-health service psychologists, either exempting them and saying you don't have to be, or saying you do. You're practicing psychology, and those of you who are doing things that could be potentially harmful, you should be licensed. So it is something I'd like us to think about or talk about. Like, what would we like to do? Because right now we do give it, and maybe we want to give the option, but it's something I'd like us to talk about at a future meeting. What do we do? You know,
Would it be useful to have that discussion at a full board meeting, or useful to have it at the licensing
Well,
committee?
that's what I was thinking, probably the licensing committee first, and then let us, talk about it and think about, and then what would we want to do, or what would we want to bring to the board?
And then
As
obviously,
something for future meetings.
if there was going to be any kind of change that occurred in that process, we'd want to make that as transparent to the public and licensees as possible. Perhaps stakeholders' meetings might be in order, but that's
Way down the line. It's just something to talk about. At one time, I know we had thought about that this group of people who we do include in our even in pathways to licensure and in terms of our licensing act, the kinds of things they do are part of what psychologists do. We do consider it the practice of psychology. So,
Not to get off on a topic that's not agendized, but I just want to clarify that when we, as a board, changed our BMP code 2903, and that was effective January 1, 2016. The language was changed to define the practice of psychology as rendering or offering to render to individuals, groups, organizations, or the public any psychological service involving the application of psychological principles, methods, and procedures. And then it goes on and on. But I wanted to clarify that if the board were to receive a complaint and it was applicable to that, we would have the authority to act. So I just want to make that clear. Yeah.
Right. Good. So it is in our licensing act, that's partly what I'm saying. So I know we can't really talk about it, but I'd like to put it on the agenda for the next licensing committee meeting. So, so that's one thing I wanted to talk about. Let me see. The other thing I kind of just want to say, because I'm always proud of these kinds of things. One day was on discipline and about all the and it was kind of the similarities between jurisdictions in terms of the kinds of things that people are disciplined for, and it's public record and all this kind of stuff. One of the things I talked about is psychologists who how do you deal with psychologists who maybe have had an exemplary career all their lives, and then they start to, maybe they have become, have organicity or dementia or something like that as they get older, and, how do you get them out of office and, get them, how do you help them transition?
Oh my goodness.
How do you help them transition?
You're preaching to the choir here.
Oh my gosh.
Was that a Freudian slip?
Gosh. Oh my gosh.
How does a board help them transition, particularly if they've done something, committed something that potentially was harmful or might have caused harm in it, but they really don't have, it's because they now have dementia or something like this. They weren't really aware of what they, were doing or what they'd done. So I had talked about to the person who was presenting it, just kind of how that's one of the things we're talking about in enforcement, how to handle this particular kind of a situation. And so we were brought up in the meeting and California is, kind of taking a look at this and blah, blah, blah. Because one of the things they were saying is that the graying of psychology, psychology is people are getting older and there aren't as many young people coming in and all this kind of stuff. So it was really interesting. I'm always happy to be part of the California board when it's like California's doing a good job, and they're way in front of it. So I just wanted to talk about that. And then the last day, and I'm just going to mention it, I'm not saying anything about it, was on the EPPP Part 2, the skills exam that is being developed as Part 2 of the National Licensing Exam. So, all right. So that's my report.
As someone who didn't get to go to ASPPB, I wish that I'd been there. Has there ever been any discussion around making those sessions maybe on videotape and available for continuing ed? Not live, of course, but it sounds like such important material that could be useful to psychologists if they wanted to review it and maybe get credit for it.
So all the materials, and thanks for saying that, because I meant to mention it and forgot. So, because I'm a graying psychologist. All the materials, they haven't been put on yet, but all the PowerPoints are put on the website. And so it's on the members only section, and all board members are members of ASPPB automatically. You can go on the website and view the materials. I also have a copy of all the materials, and I can certainly make them available to.
If you could send those to me, I can forward them.
Okay. Be happy to do that. Yeah.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Public comment? And last but not least, our agenda item 23G, efforts on updating the DCA brochure, professional therapy never includes sex. Ms. Sorek, would you please be able to give us an update on that?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, it started with the licensing committee during Pathways, went to the Outreach and Education Committee with last year with input from the Board of Behavioral Sciences as well as the Medical Board of California. So the next step will be that one expert from each of the 3 programs will be present in December, on December 7th. And this group will be meeting from 1 to 5, and they will review the draft document that the board staff and legal counsel from each of the 3 programs put together, and then provide any additional input or feedback into the draft. That draft will then be provided to the programs for any additional input and feedback, and then that will be given to the Department of Consumer Affairs, who will be the ultimate publisher of the brochure. So that's kind of stepwise where it will go next.
Just a quick question. When you mentioned expert from each, so do we reach within our panel of experts? Okay.
So we reach within our panel of experts for someone that specializes in opining on cases where there are boundary issues, so that they can provide their professional expertise on how the brochure should be worded. And that there'll be one representative from the Medical Board, Board of Behavioral Sciences, as well as our board. And I think we had 2 experts that had volunteered, so we selected one, and they'll be participating at that
great
meeting.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Public comment? And that is all. Thank you.
Okay, so we're on to agenda item number 24. We are in the Bell Lab. Now I've gone to horse racing.
You still need soccer. Don't forget in basketball.
Anyway. Agenda item number 24A is the board meeting and event calendar, which you will find in your package. The only thing to add here is that we're in the process of scheduling an enforcement committee meeting between now and the end of the year. to continue to look at the disciplinary guidelines as well as some other items. And then in terms of committee updates, we have, in consultation with Ms. Sorick, it appears that we should at least anticipate that we're going to need to look at the issue of the EPPP2. And given that fact, we're going to be forming, we don't call it a task force, do we? What do we call it?
An ad hoc committee.
An ad hoc committee on the EPPP2, which will involve not only a representative of the board, which will be a board member or two, but we'll also be looking to professional associations, to CPAGs. So we'll be involving as many people as possible that would have direct impact on, or so that we have input from licensees and from graduate students and so on and so forth. So more will be revealed as time goes on, but I just wanted to say that that is in the works because we're anticipating that the EPPP2 will eventually come onto the market, and as it's currently constituted, it appears that it will be a standalone product, so you won't be able to break out a part of the test and just take that test. You have to use the whole package as a whole. So it will be necessary for us to think about how we're going to handle that issue. Anything else on the President's report that I'm missing? Okay. Item number 25 is election of officers, which typically we would do in the last quarterly board meeting. But because two board members we knew for certain were not going to be here today, and one board member had to leave a little early because of a pre-existing engagement, rather than have an election of officers today, we're going to hold that over until the February board meeting. So you're stuck with me for at least one more board meeting. But what we do need to do is to, because the terms end at the end of the year, we do need to have a motion made to extend the term of the current officers until the next quarterly board meeting. Is that on the money?
Ready for that?
Yes, I suppose you could make it more broad and say until the next election of officers.
Okay.
Just
Yeah.
in case something occurs at the next quarterly board meeting.
Okay. Would anybody like to make that motion?
I move that we continue with the present officers until the next election of officers.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion among board members? Oh, you've turned your microphone on.
Because I'm getting ready to say aye.
Oh.
Only four of us can be on at once.
I can override you all. I've got the kill switch up here. Does it?
Power.
Is there any public comment? Oh, sorry. No, I've turned mine off. Is there any public comment on that motion? Mr. Glass-Steagall?
Bernal,
Aye.
Kasuga,
Aye.
Erickson,
Aye.
Horn,
Aye.
Phillips. Aye. Motion passes.
Okay. So, great. If there are suggestions for future agenda items on item number 26, we can entertain such agenda item ideas at this time. Any from board members? Any agenda items, suggestions from from the public?
Could I just make a quick comment that outside board events, you have CPA convention March 10th through the 11th, and it's actually April 26th through the 29th.
Thank you.
Any other commentary? Okay. So there being none, it appears that we've reached the end of the agenda. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I would like to make a motion to adjourn for today's board meeting, officially for 2017.
There you go. And a
I
second?
second.
Okay. Any discussion? Anybody going to object to this? Mr. Glass-Steagall?
Bernal,
Aye.
Kasuga,
Aye.
Erickson,
Aye.
Horn.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much.